At 21, Wyatt Colson watched his Uncle Dale read off the farmhouse, the tractor, and the $340,000 savings account, then toss him the deed to 40 acres of dead trees and $1,900 in back taxes with a laugh. Good luck selling a graveyard, boy. The room wasn't even a real courtroom, just the annex behind the Nelson County Courthouse on Bellamy Street, 6 folding chairs borrowed from the Methodist basement, a card table, and a window unit rattling like it had somewhere better to be. Attorney Corwin sat behind a stack of paper, thick enough to stop a door. He read in the flat voice lawyers use for other people's grief. Dale Colson leaned back in his chair the whole time. He had his father's jaw and none of his father's patience. Renata sat beside him in a blouse still stiff from the store tag, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue she never used. "The farmhouse and the 10 acres it sits on," Corwin read, "to Dale Wayne Colson. The 2019 John Deere tractor and grafting equipment, already transferred by bill of sale dated March, to Dale Wayne Colson. The Farmers and Merchants Savings Account balanced $340,011 to Dale Wayne Colson and Renata Colson jointly." Nobody in that room acted surprised. Dale had been moving money and machinery out of his father's name since February, back when Hollis could still sign his own checks and didn't ask why his son needed him to. Wyatt sat with his hands flat on his knees so they wouldn't shake. He'd learned that trick 2 years back, in waiting rooms, watching numbers on monitors instead of watching his grandfather's face. And the remaining property, Corwin said, 40 acres known as the Colson Orchard, off Route 6 to Wyatt Earl Colson. Dale laughed before Corwin even finished the sentence. Not a big laugh. A short one through his nose, the kind a man lets out when a joke lands exactly where he expected. 40 acres of dead trees, Dale said, sliding the folder across the table like he was tossing scraps to a dog under a porch. And $1,900 in back taxes nobody's paid since Dad got sick. Good luck selling a graveyard, boy. Renata didn't laugh. She just looked at Wyatt the way she looked at a receipt she meant to argue about later. "He always did feel sorry for you," she said. "I guess this was Hollis's way of showing it." Wyatt didn't say anything. He'd learned that trick too. You don't hand people ammunition, you let the quiet do the work. His hand found his jacket pocket without him telling it to. Inside, worn smooth at one corner, sat a small tin tag stamped with a number, 3 digits and a letter. Hollis had pressed it into his palm the week before he died. No explanation, just, "Keep this on you, boy. Don't lose it." Wyatt had stopped asking Hollis to explain things near the end. You learned to just do what he said and trust the reason would show up later. It usually had, his whole life. He figured this time wouldn't be different, though he had no earthly idea what a scrap of stamped tin was supposed to be worth. He signed where Corwin pointed. $62 sat in his checking account. He knew the number the way you know your own name because he'd checked it twice at the gas station that morning, once before he pumped $5 in and once after. Outside, the July heat sat on Bellamy Street, like a hand on the back of your neck. Dale and Renata got into Dale's new truck, paid for the way everything else was getting paid for lately, and didn't look back once. Wyatt stood on the courthouse steps holding a folder with a dead orchard in it and watched the truck turn toward the auto shop. Dale had opened that spring with money that used to belong to somebody who could barely lift a spoon by the end. He didn't cry. He'd done most of his crying already, alone, in a truck cab in a hospital parking lot in Charlottesville. 2 years of afternoons stacked up behind him like cordwood. Nobody in that family had shown up for those afternoons except him. He'd driven Hollis to chemo 41 times. He knew the number because he'd started keeping a little notebook, mileage, and appointment times, back when it seemed like the kind of thing that might matter to somebody someday. 7 medications, 4 times a day, on a schedule he'd never once had to write down because he'd carried it in his head the whole 2 years, exact to the minute. Nobody else in Tanner's Gap could tell you what a person needs at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday to keep breathing right. Wyatt could. That was the kind of use he'd been to Hollis Colson, not the kind you sold a tractor for. He moved into the packing shed that same week because $62 doesn't rent an apartment, not even in a town as small as Tanner's Gap. The shed sat at the end of Route 6, where the road did its last switchback up Sutton's Gap before flattening out into Orchard Rose. a low tin-roofed building Hollis's father had built in 1958 to grade apples in. It had a hand pump, a wood stove nobody had used since Reagan was president, and a cot Wyatt dragged in from the farmhouse before Dale could tell him he couldn't. $11 bought a hot plate at the hardware store on Bellamy. $9 bought a space heater he'd need for winter and couldn't afford yet, so he put that one back on the shelf. He kept his receipts in the same jacket pocket as the tin tag, a habit from 2 years of tracking every dollar that went toward keeping an old man comfortable while the rest of the family stayed comfortable somewhere else. Every morning before his shift at the feed store, Wyatt walked the rows. Nobody paid him to. Nobody asked him to anymore. The orchard hadn't set a real crop in 3 years. The trees gone gray and brittle in patches, whole sections that looked like they'd given up arguing with the soil. But 2 trees at the far east corner still held green at the tips, a pair Hollis had grafted himself back before Wyatt was born, and those 2 got water from a 5-gallon bucket every single morning, rain or shine, because Hollis had asked him once, years back, to look after them, and Hollis Colson never had to ask a person twice for anything that mattered. The rows themselves ran crooked. Everybody in the county knew it, joked about it even. The Colson orchard planted by a man who apparently couldn't run a straight line with a string and 2 stakes. Wyatt had heard Dale say it plenty of times growing up, usually right before he laughed. Hollis never explained the crooked rows to anybody but Wyatt, and even then only once, pruning shears in his hand, sun low behind the ridge. "The trees aren't planted crooked, boy," he'd said. "They're planted for a road that hasn't come yet." Wyatt hadn't understood it then. He still didn't. He'd filed it away the way he filed away most things Hollis said near the end, half riddle, half exhaustion talking, and gone back to what needed doing. He noticed the fence post his second week alone out there. He'd noticed it 100 times before, actually, growing up, and never thought a thing of it. A series of numbers scratched into the wood along the property line where it met the county road, faded gray with weather, 7 digits, and a dash. He'd always figured it was Hollis marking a fence repair date or a load count, something a farmer scratches down and forgets. He ran his thumb over it that morning, out of nothing but old habit, the same way he touched the tin tag in his pocket and moved on to fill the bucket. The DOT truck showed up on a Thursday. Wyatt was hauling water to the 2 grafted trees when he saw it. A white pickup with the Virginia Department of Transportation seal on the door, parked square at the edge of his property line where the fence met Route 6. 2 men in orange vests stood beside it with a tripod and a long yellow instrument Wyatt didn't have a name for, sighting down the road, then down his rows, then back at a laptop mounted on the tailgate. He set the bucket down slow, water sloshing over the rim, and walked toward the fence. "Help you fellas find something?" The older one glanced up, friendly enough, but careful in the way people get when they're not supposed to say much. "Just a preliminary survey, sir. Route 6 realignment study. Nothing official yet? Realignment where exactly?" The man's eyes flicked toward the orchard rows behind Wyatt, then back to his instrument, quick, like he'd caught himself looking somewhere he shouldn't. "We'll have more information once the corridor study's final. Have a good one." They packed the tripod into the truck bed and pulled off toward Sutton's Gap before Wyatt could ask another question, gravel popping under the tires, leaving him standing at the fence line with an empty bucket and an itch behind his ribs he couldn't quite name. He looked back at his crooked rows, running gray and green toward the ridge in lines nobody in 3 generations had ever been able to explain. Then he looked down at the fence post beside him, at 7 scratched numbers he'd walked past his whole life without once wondering what they were for. For the first time since the reading of the will, Wyatt Colson had a question worth losing sleep over, and it wasn't how he was going to pay $1,900 in back taxes on land nobody wanted. The DOT truck disappeared around the bend, and Wyatt stood at the fence a long minute before he went back to the bucket. He finished watering the 2 grafted trees. Then he stood under them, looking at the ridge, thinking about numbers scratched into a fence post he'd never once questioned. That night he couldn't sleep. The cot in the shed creaked every time he turned over, and the tin roof ticked as it cooled. He lay there running through everything Hollis ever said that hadn't made sense at the time. The crooked rows, the fence post numbers. "Keep this on you, boy, don't lose it," about a scrap of stamped tin that opened nothing Wyatt had ever found. Around midnight he gave up on sleeping and lit the lantern instead. He knew every inch of that shed. He'd swept it as a boy, stacked crates in it, napped in the corner during hot Augusts, while Hollis grated apples 2 feet away, but he'd never really looked at the floor. He looked at it now. Most of the boards ran tight, gray, nailed down since before Wyatt was born. One board, near the cold wood stove, sat a half-inch proud of the others. He noticed it because his sock caught the edge walking past. He knelt down, pressed on it. It gave just slightly where the others didn't. "All right," he said out loud to nobody. He found a flathead screwdriver in a coffee can by the door and worked it under the board's edge. The nails came up easy, too easy, like somebody had pulled them before and set them back loose on purpose. The board lifted clean. Underneath was packed dirt, darker than the dirt around it, like it had been dug and filled more than once. Wyatt didn't have a shovel in the shed, so he used the screwdriver and his hands. 10 minutes in, his fingers hit metal. He worked it free, slow, careful, the way you'd handle something that might not want to be found. It came up wrapped in a scrap of feed sack gone stiff with age. Under the sack, a tin box, rust freckling the lid, the kind that used to hold shortbread or ribbon candy. A loop of baling wire held it shut. His hands were shaking by the time he got the wire off. Inside sat a smaller box, steel gray paint chipped at the corners, with a 3-number combination dial built into the front. A lockbox, the kind you'd keep in a gun safe, not bury under a shed floor. Wyatt turned it over. No writing on it anywhere. No hint. He set it down and dug through what else the tin held. A folded grocery receipt so old the ink had gone the color of weak tea. A photograph of Hollis Young, maybe 30, standing in front of 2 saplings that had to be the same 2 trees Wyatt watered every morning, though they looked nothing alike now. All that green ahead of them instead of behind. And one more thing, a grafting tag, the little aluminum kind orchardmen wire onto a limb to mark the rootstock and scion, stamped with a number .37R114. Wyatt sat back on his heels and stared at it a long time. "Why would you keep a tag in a box?" he said. "Under a floor, under a lock." Nobody answered him. That was the trouble with all of it. Hollis had left him a whole conversation and taken his half of it to the grave. He tried the lockbox dial anyway, spinning it on guesses. Hollis's birthday, Wyatt's birthday. The house number on the mailbox out on Route 6. Nothing gave. He gave up near 2 in the morning, wrapped the tin box back in the feed sack, and slid it under the cot instead of back under the floor. He didn't trust the floor anymore. He didn't trust much of anything in that shed anymore, not in a bad way. In a way that made the whole building feel bigger than it looked. He was at the feed store by 7, half asleep, weighing out 50-pound bags of scratch grain for Loyal Wits chickens when he found the envelope. It was taped to the shed door when he'd left that morning, tucked under the latch where he wouldn't miss it. He hadn't had time to open it before his shift. He opened it now, behind the counter, between customers, 220s folded once. A note in handwriting that shook a little, an old hand, ballpoint pressed hard enough to show through the paper. "Your grandpa fixed my roof in '09 and wouldn't take a dime. This isn't near even. Buy yourself something hot to eat. Doris Pruitt." Wyatt read it twice. $40 was real money to him now, more than half what stood between him and a full tank of gas. He folded the note back up and put it in his jacket pocket next to the tin tag and didn't say anything to anybody, because there wasn't anybody in that store to say it to except Loyal Wits ledger and a 50-pound bag of scratch grain. Earl Ferris came in a little after 10. Wyatt knew him the way you know most old men in a town of 900 people. By sight, by name, by which pew. Earl was tall, going soft in the shoulders, 70-some, wore a ball cap that said Nelson County on it in letters faded past reading, unless you already knew what it said. "Need fence staples," Earl said. "Galvanized, not the cheap ones. Aisle 3. Wyatt came around the counter to show him, more out of habit than necessity, box of 100 or the bulk bin? Bulk. "I'm not made of money." Earl squinted at him. "You're Hollis's grandboy." "Yes, sir. Sorry about your granddad." Earl said it plain, no performance in it, which was more than Wyatt had gotten from half the county. He was a good hand with a graft. Better than good. You knew him? Worked section lines with him back in the 70s. County survey crew. Earl pulled a bin of staples toward himself, counting out a scoop at a time. Man could read a piece of ground like most folks read a newspaper. Wyatt stood there a second longer than the conversation called for. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Kind of a strange question. Strange questions are the only kind worth asking. There's a DOT truck been out at my place. Survey truck, tripod, the whole thing. Wouldn't tell me much. Said something about a realignment study on Route 6. Something shifted in Earl's face. Small. If Wyatt hadn't been watching close, he'd have missed it. They say where the realignment runs? No, sir. Just looked back toward my orchard a couple times and clammed up. Earl set his scoop down. Your granddad ever talked to you about the road? Said something once about the trees being planted for a road that hasn't come yet. Didn't make a lick of sense to me. Earl didn't laugh. Wyatt noticed that particularly because everybody else who'd heard that line so far had laughed or looked at him like he was simple for repeating it. It made sense to him, Earl said. I promise you that. You know what he meant? Earl looked toward the front window, toward Bellamy Street, like the answer might be parked out there. I know your granddad fought the state over that corridor for longer than you've been alive, he said. I know he never sold what they wanted. Past that, I couldn't tell you without seeing paper. What kind of paper? The kind that either exists or it doesn't. Earl picked his staples back up, businesslike now, like he'd said more than he meant to. You find any paper out at that place, boy, you bring it to me before you bring it to anybody else. You hear? Yes, sir. I mean it. Not your uncle. Not some lawyer looking to take a third for reading you 2 pages. Me first. Wyatt felt the tin box under his cot like it had a pulse. There's a graph tag, he said, slow, testing the words before he committed to them, stamped with a number. 37R114. Found it with some other things of his. Earl went still in a way that made the whole store feel smaller. Where, he said, in a lockbox. Well, not in it. With it. The box has a combination dial and I can't get it open. Bring me that tag, Earl said. Today, if you can get off work. Don't try guessing that dial yourself all week. Your granddad didn't do anything by accident, and he sure didn't stamp a random number on a scrap of aluminum and bury it. You think the tag's the combination. I think your granddad marked every tree on that place with a number that meant 3 different things at once, and I helped him do it 40 years ago, and I never once in my life expected to need to remember how. Earl set $2 and change on the counter for the staples, more than they cost, and didn't wait for it back. Feed store closes at 4? 5. I'll be at Ferris Place on Whitlock Road at 6. Bring the tag. Bring the box if you can carry it. He walked out before Wyatt could ask another question, the bell over the door clattering behind him, and Wyatt stood there holding $2.40 he hadn't earned, staring at the door like Earl Ferris might come back through it with the rest of the answer already worked out. He didn't. But Wyatt had 6 hours to get through, and for the first time since the folding chairs and the card table on Bellamy Street, they didn't feel like 6 hours he was only surviving. Wyatt got off at 5, same as he told Earl he would, and drove the 11 miles out Whitlock Road with the tin box wrapped in a towel on the passenger seat like it might crack if he hit a pothole wrong. His truck was down to a quarter tank. He did the math without meaning to, the way he did math on everything now. Quarter tank got him to Monday. Monday got him a paycheck of maybe $110 after the feed store took its cut for taxes. Earl Ferris lived in a low brick house with a wraparound porch and a shop out back bigger than the house itself. Tools hung on pegboard in rows so straight they looked drawn with a ruler. He was waiting on the porch steps when Wyatt pulled in, a mason jar of tea sweating in his hand. You bring it? Both of it. Wyatt lifted the towel-wrapped box out like it was a baby. Tin box, lockbox, the tag. Come on back to the shop, better light. The shop smelled like machine oil and cut wood. Earl cleared a workbench with one sweep of his forearm, papers and a carburetor sliding into a milk crate, and set an old gooseneck lamp burning bright and yellow over the surface. Wyatt laid the tin box down, then the smaller steel lockbox, then the aluminum graph tag, 37R114 stamped into it thin and worn. Earl picked the tag up first, turned it over twice. 37-114, he said, mostly to himself. Your granddad had a system. Most orchard men just track rootstock and scion. Hollis tracked a third thing nobody else knew to look for. What third thing? Watch. Earl set the tag down and spun the lockbox dial with 2 fingers, slow, patient, the way a man handles a thing he trusts more than he trusts most people. He'd take the graph number and split it. First two digits, one direction. Last three, the other. It was a joke between us, near enough. He'd say, Earl, a man needs one door only he can open. So 37's the first turn, and 114 splits again. 1, then 14. Earl worked the dial right to 37, left past 0 to 1, right to 14. His hand didn't shake even a little. He showed me this same trick on a shedlock in 1979. Told me if anything ever happened to him and I needed in that shed, I'd know how. He never told me that part. He didn't need to. He told you the trees instead. Earl pulled the latch. It gave with a small metallic cough, dust falling off the hinge. Wyatt leaned in so close his breath fogged the metal. Inside sat a length of white PVC pipe, capped on both ends, the kind you'd use to keep blueprints dry on a job site. A rubber band, brittle with age, held a folded index card to the side of it. Earl lifted the tube out with both hands like it weighed more than it did. That a map tube? Wyatt asked. That's exactly what that is. Earl read the index card first, holding it under the lamp. Wyatt watched his face while he read it. Nothing on it moved for a long 3 seconds. What's it say? Earl set the card down and turned it so Wyatt could read it too. Hollis's handwriting, cramped and shaky near the end but legible. Wyatt, if you found this, I'm gone and you dug where I told you to look after. Don't sell this land till you read what's in the tube. Take it to Earl. He'll know what it means. I'm sorry I couldn't say all this while I still had the words for it. Grandpa Wyatt didn't say anything for a second. His throat had gone tight in a way he didn't want Earl to see, so he looked at the tube instead of the card. Open it, he said. Earl worked the end cap loose with a pair of pliers wrapped in a shop rag, careful not to crack 40-year-old plastic. A roll of paper slid partway out, yellowed at the edges but dry, the way paper stays when somebody thought ahead about keeping the damp off it. He unrolled it flat on the workbench, weighing the corners down with a socket set and a can of bearing grease. Wyatt looked at it and saw a page of tight legal print, a raised notary seal stamped in one corner, and under it, a survey plat, lines and numbers, and a long curved corridor drawn in red ink straight through a set of rectangles labeled Colson, Hollis E. Read it, Wyatt said. Please. I can't make sense of the legal part fast enough. Earl put on a pair of readers from his shirt pocket and leaned close to the lamp. Deed of reservation, he read. Executed 1961. Commonwealth of Virginia, Department of Highways, Nelson County. He kept going, quiet, tracing the line with one finger, whereas Hollis E. Colson, owner of record, grants no present conveyance, but reserves and retains sole right to negotiate future right-of-way consideration for any highway corridor traversing the herein described 40-acre parcel, said reservation binding upon heirs and assigns in perpetuity. He looked up. Meaning what? Wyatt said. In regular words, meaning your granddad never sold them the road. Earl set the readers down on the bench. Meaning 65 years ago, the state wanted to run a highway through this exact ground, and Hollis let them survey it, let them draw it, and then told them no. Not never. Not yet. Only him or his people could ever say yes, and nobody bought him out since. Doesn't look like it. Doesn't look like anybody in Richmond even remembered this paper existed till some fool in a DOT truck started running centerline sites past your fence line last week. Earl tapped the plat. This corridor right here, this red line, matches your rows. I'd bet my truck on it. Wyatt thought about the crooked lines everybody in the county laughed about. He thought about Hollis with pruning shears in his hand, sun low behind the ridge. He planted the orchard on the survey line, Wyatt said, half to himself. The trees aren't crooked, they're marking it. I'd say that's exactly what he did. Earl folded his readers and set them on the bench. Man plants a whole orchard as a fence around a promise he made to himself. 60 years he waited on somebody to come ask for that road proper so he could finally say his piece. Why not just sell it and take the money? He was broke half his life, because it wasn't about the money to him. Earl picked the index card back up and read it again, slower this time. It was about who got to say yes. He didn't trust the county to deal fair with a Colson while he was breathing, and I expect he trusted them even less to deal fair with you after he was gone. Earl looked at Wyatt over his readers. So he made sure whoever came asking would have to come through paper, not a handshake. Paper doesn't forget. People do. Wyatt stood there with both hands flat on the workbench, looking down at a red line on old paper that ran straight through land his uncle had called a graveyard 3 weeks ago on a folding chair on Bellamy Street. "What's this worth?" he said. "If it's real. If it holds up." Earl didn't answer right off. He walked to a shelf, pulled down a battered county plat book of his own, flipped it open to a marked page, and set it beside the deed. DOT paid Ansel Pruitt $11,000 an acre for right-of-way strip-out past Afton 2 years back, and that corridor wasn't half as clean as this one. He tapped the red line again. "You've got 40 acres sitting square on a proposed bypass center line. You're not talking about strip value no more, once this surfaces. You're talking about the whole parcel getting reassessed as corridor land." He looked at Wyatt straight. "I wouldn't be surprised if this comes in over $2 million once the state's forced to negotiate instead of just survey." Wyatt sat down on an overturned bucket because his knees didn't feel steady enough to argue with him standing up. "2 million," he said, "give or take." Earl rolled the deed with more care than he'd unrolled it. "And your Uncle Dale already sold the tractor and the grafting rig for cash before the will was even read good. I heard that from 3 people at church." "He did. Then he's going to have a hard year, once this gets out." Earl slid the deed back into its tube and capped it. "This isn't something you take to your uncle. This is something you take to a lawyer, and to the county recorder in that order, before anybody else knows this tube came up out of that floor. Somebody already knows the DOT's been out there. That's a survey truck. That's not the deed. Big difference." Earl set the tube in Wyatt's hands like he was handing him something alive. "You keep this on you, not under a cot, not under a floor. On you." "Yes, sir. And you call Loyal at the feed store tomorrow and tell him you need the day off. You've got a courthouse to visit." Wyatt drove home in the dark with the tube on the seat where the tin box had ridden that morning, and for the first time since 2 folding chairs and a card table on Bellamy Street, the crooked rows didn't look like a joke to him anymore. They looked like his grandfather's handwriting, laid out in dirt, 60 years patient, waiting on him to finally read it right. Wyatt was up before 6 the next morning, same as always, walking the rows with a water jug on his hip. He stopped at the 2 trees Hollis had grafted himself. He watered them anyway. Habit didn't ask him what the deed was worth, it just told him to show up. He called Loyal from the shed phone at 7. "Need the day, Loyal? Family business. That'll come out of your check. I know it. You all right, boy?" "Getting there," Wyatt said, and hung up before Loyal could ask more than that. Earl picked him up at 8 in a truck older than Wyatt was, the map tube riding between them on the bench seat like a third passenger. They didn't talk much on the drive into Lovingston. Earl had both hands on the wheel, and his jaw set the way it got, Wyatt was learning, when he was thinking hard about something he didn't want to say out loud yet. "Lawyer first," Earl said. "Recorder's office second. In that order, and don't let anybody talk you out of the order. Who's the lawyer? Deborah Kessler. Handled my divorce and my brother's timber dispute. She won't blink at this." Deborah Kessler's office sat over a hardware store on Bellamy Street, 1 flight up, a window unit rattling in the July heat. She was maybe 50, reading glasses pushed up in gray hair, and she didn't stand when they walked in. She just looked at the tube under Wyatt's arm like she already knew it wasn't a poster. "Earl Ferris," she said, "you bring me trouble or you bring me money. Depends which way this goes." Earl set the tube on her desk. "Might be both." Wyatt unrolled the deed while she cleared space, weighing the corners down with a stapler and a coffee mug. She read it standing up, glasses low on her nose, lips moving over the legal language the way Earl's had the night before. 61, she said. Department of Highways. Reservation clause. She looked up at Wyatt. "You're Hollis Colson's grandson." "Yes, ma'am. And this has been sitting where? Buried. Packing shed floor. My whole life. Near enough." She read it again, slower. "This is a live instrument," she said. "If it was recorded and never released, it still binds. 60 years doesn't kill a recorded reservation in Virginia. Only a release does, and I don't see one." "That's what I told him," Earl said. "You told him a guess. I'm telling him law." She sat down finally, pulled a legal pad toward her. "First thing we do is confirm it's actually on record. A deed sitting in a tube is a nice story. A deed sitting in a deed book with a recorder's stamp is a weapon." She looked at Wyatt. Says here Deed Book 87, page 412. We go verify that number exists and says what this copy says. And if it does, then your uncle's already spent money that was never his to spend, and the state's got a corridor problem they don't know about yet. She wrote something down. My fee to start is $400. I'll take it against whatever comes out the other end if this is real, so you don't have to hand me cash you don't have. I've got $62, Wyatt said, because it felt wrong not to say it. Then you'll owe me $338 when this pays, Deborah said, without missing a beat, and I'll sleep fine tonight either way. The county recorder's office was 2 blocks down, in the courthouse basement, all metal shelving and fluorescent light. A woman named Patsy Yunt pulled the ledger herself, thick as a phone book, and ran her finger down the index until she found it. Book 87, she said. Page 412. She hauled it off the shelf, laid it flat, and turned pages with a licked thumb until the number matched. Wyatt leaned over it. Same red seal, same cramped legal print, same name, Hollis E. Colson, typed clean at the top like the state had once cared enough to get it right. Any release filed against it? Deborah asked. Any later instrument that undoes it? Patsy checked a card file, then a second index, taking her time. Nothing, she said. No release, no subsequent conveyance touching this parcel's mineral or corridor rights. Whatever this reserved in 1961, it's still reserved. Say that again for him, Earl said, nodding at Wyatt. It's still good, Patsy said, plain like she was reading off a grocery total. 65 years, and it's still good. Wyatt didn't say anything for a second. His eyes stung, and he blinked it back before anybody could ask him about it. There's one more thing, Earl said on the drive home. The deed back in its tube, Deborah's card in Wyatt's shirt pocket. Your granddad had a habit. Corner posts. What about them? He used to scratch numbers into the tops of corner posts. Little private code, same as the graph tags. I want to check your northeast corner before I drop you off. They drove out Route 6 and up the switchback to the packing shed, and Earl walked the fence line with his hands in his pockets like a man revisiting a memory instead of a piece of ground. At the northeast corner, where the orchard met the road easement, an old locust post leaned half-rotted, bark long gone. Earl crouched and ran his thumb over the top of it. Scratched there, old and shallow but readable if you knew to look, 2 numbers separated by a dash. 87, Earl read. 412. Wyatt crouched next to him. That's the book. That's the page. He didn't just bury it, Earl said. He marked where the truth was filed, out here where nobody but him would ever think to look twice at a rotten fence post. He stood up, knees cracking. Man didn't leave anything to chance, not once. Wyatt looked down the row from the post, past the crooked trees, all the way to where the ridge cut the sky. He wanted somebody to find all of it, he said. Not just the deed, the proof it was real. I'd say that's exactly right. They didn't get more than 2 days of quiet before the rest of it started moving. Dale called Wyatt's cell on a Thursday evening, and Wyatt almost didn't answer, then did. Heard something strange today, Dale said. No hello first. Heard you and Earl Ferris been down at the courthouse pulling deed books. Where'd you hear that? Small town, Wyatt. Patsy Yunt's my wife's cousin twice over. Dale's voice had a hard edge under the friendly it was trying to wear. What's going on with that orchard? Nothing you need worry about. It's mine. Was in the will. It was dead land in the will. Dead land with back taxes I'm not covering. A pause. Renata says you're trying to pull something. Says you found paper out there and you're keeping it from family. It's not family paper, Dale. It's mine. Granddad left it to me specific. Everything he left was supposed to be specific. And look how that turned out for you. Dale's voice climbed. You got the worthless 40 acres because that's what was worthless. If there's something out there worth money, that's estate property, and I'm the executor, and I'll see a judge about it before I let you run off with something that belongs split 3 ways. There's no 3 ways, Dale. You and Renata took the house, the tractor, the account. I got the orchard. That's what Granddad wrote down. We'll see what a judge says about that, Dale said, and hung up. 9 days later, a certified letter came to the shed, forwarded through Deborah's office because Wyatt still hadn't fixed his mailing address like she'd told him to. Inside was a filing, copied plain, header reading Nelson County Circuit Court. Dale Colson, in his capacity as executor of the estate of Hollis Colson, petitioning for emergency review of asset distribution, alleging the orchard parcel constituted an undisclosed asset of material value at time of probate, and requesting the court order the parcel sold, proceeds divided per statute among all heirs. Wyatt drove the letter straight to Deborah's office, didn't call first. She read it standing at her window, glasses low again. "He's not wrong that this is fast," she said. "He's wrong about everything else." She set the paper down. "This is a shot across the bow, Wyatt. He's scared, and scared men in probate court file things they can't win because filing costs $87 and losing costs nothing but time. Can he actually force a sale? Not of property already distributed clean under a probated will, absent fraud." She looked at him hard. "Is there fraud? Did you hide anything from anybody during probate?" "No, ma'am. I didn't even know the deed existed till 3 weeks ago." "Then he's got nothing but a filing fee and a bad feeling." She sat down, pulled her pad over. "But we answer it. Every filing gets answered, or the silence gets read as agreement. I'll draft response papers this week." She looked up. "There's a public hearing coming too. Word's already moving that DOT wants to present its bypass plan to the Planning Commission. That's not us. That's the state's own calendar. But once that hearing's on the books, Dale's petition and your reservation both end up in the same room, same week, whether either side planned it that way or not." Wyatt sat there with his hands on his knees, feeling the shed's cold floor through his boot soles, even though it was July outside. "What do I do till then?" he said. "You go to work," Deborah said. "You water your trees. You let the paper do what your granddad built it to do." She tapped the copy of the deed sitting in a folder now, instead of a tube. "He didn't wait 60 years for you to panic in the last 9 days. Wyatt drove back out Route 6 with the window down, past the courthouse, past the hardware store, past Patsy Yunt's little basement window at ground level where a deed book had sat waiting longer than his own father had been alive. He thought about a scratched number on a rotten fence post, and a red line on old paper, and a man with pruning shears telling him once that the trees weren't crooked, they were patient. He didn't feel like he was surviving anymore. He felt like he was standing in the middle of something his grandfather had built to outlast every one of them, and all he had to do now was not blink before it finished landing. Renata came out to the shed on a Tuesday alone, driving her own car instead of Dale's truck. Wyatt heard the gravel before he saw her. She stood at the door in a blouse too nice for a dirt lot. "Can I come in? It's open." She looked around at the cot, the hot plate, the 2 crates he used for a table. Her mouth tightened like the sight cost her something. "Dale doesn't know I'm here," she said. "Okay. I raised you half your teenage years, Wyatt, after your mama left." She folded her arms. "I'm not the enemy here. Nobody said you were. He filed that petition because he's scared, not because he's greedy." She said it fast, like she'd rehearsed it in the car. "The shop's got payments due, $4,100 a month. If this orchard's worth what people are saying and he gets cut out of it, he already got the house. The account, $340,000, Renata." Wyatt kept his voice flat. "I got a graveyard and $62. That's not fair what you're doing." "What am I doing?" "Keeping it from us, whatever you found." She glanced at the loose plank in the corner, and Wyatt watched her eyes catch on it, then move away, like she already knew, like the whole county already knew, and was just waiting for him to say it out loud. "Granddad left it to me," he said. "That's what I found. A will he signed, and a will you two didn't like." Renata's jaw worked. "Your granddad wasn't right at the end. Cancer does things to a man's judgment. He was righter than anybody at that table," Wyatt said. "You want to talk about judgment, Renata. Talk about selling the tractor before the funeral flowers wilted." She didn't have an answer for that one. She stood there a second, then turned for the door. "He's going to lose that shop," she said, quiet, not looking back. "You understand that, whatever else happens." "That's not mine to fix," Wyatt said. "It never was." She left without another word, and Wyatt sat down on the cot and didn't feel good about any of it. Not the way he'd said it, not the way her car sounded pulling out onto Route 6. But he didn't feel wrong either. That was new. He sat with that a while. 2 days later, a thick envelope came to Deborah's office, and she called Wyatt in to see it. "Circuit Court," she said, sliding it across the desk. Dale's lawyer amended the petition. He's not just asking for a sale now. He's asking the judge for an injunction, wants to bar you from communicating with the Department of Transportation until the estate dispute's settled. Wyatt read the word injunction twice before it landed. He's trying to gag me. He's trying to freeze you out before DOT ever hears your name attached to that deed. Deborah tapped the page. Somebody's coached him. This isn't an $87 filing fee move anymore. This is a real lawyer's strategy. Who's he hire? Man named Curtis Ambrose, out of Charlottesville. Does condemnation work for landowners fighting the state? Deborah leaned back. Which tells me something. Ambrose doesn't do family probate. He does highway money. Somebody told Dale what this corridor is really worth, and Dale went and hired a lawyer who knows how to fight over exactly that kind of money. So he knows. He knows enough to be dangerous. She pulled her pad over. Here's what worries me. If DOT gets served, notice that ownership's in dispute, they can pause negotiations entirely and wait on the court. That could tie this up 2 years, 3. Meanwhile, the state can revisit the bypass route, decide your corridor's not worth the headache, and go around you instead. Wyatt felt his stomach drop in a way it hadn't since the funeral. They'd just root around us? States do that. It's cheaper to move a line on a map than fight a family in court. She looked at him steady. We have to get in front of DOT before this injunction hearing, not after. You need your existence and your claim on their record before a judge tells you to go quiet. How do we do that? We send formal notice. Today. She was already writing. Letter to the district right-of-way office in Charlottesville. Attaches the recorded deed, the book and page number, puts them on notice that Hollis Colson's heir is asserting the 1961 reservation and requesting they proceed with acquisition talks directly with you as record owner. She looked up. Once that letter's received and logged, you exist in their file. Dale's injunction can slow you down. It can't erase a document they've already got. Do it, Wyatt said. She did it that afternoon, standing at the fax machine herself, because she didn't trust the front desk girl to run something this size without asking questions. Wyatt watched the pages feed through, one at a time, the deed's copy going out over a phone line to an office he'd never seen, in a city he'd never been to, and he thought about a rotten fence post out on Route 6 with 2 numbers scratched into the top of it, older than he was, waiting on exactly this moment. The response came back 6 days later, not from a lawyer this time, but from a man named Reginald Sowers, a right-of-way agent with the Virginia Department of Transportation. He called Deborah's office and asked for a meeting, and Deborah told him to come to Tanner's Gap himself if he wanted to see the ground the deed was talking about. Sowers showed up in a state car, tie loosened in the heat, a leather folder under his arm. He walked the rows with Wyatt and Earl both, comparing the plat to a laminated corridor map he pulled out of the folder. Your row spacing matches our center line within 8 feet, he said, crouching at the edge where the orchard met the road easement. That's not luck. Somebody planted to this line on purpose. That was my granddad, Wyatt said. He knew what he was doing. Sowers stood, brushed his knees off. I'll be straight with you two. If this reservation holds up and Ms. Kessler's copy looks clean to me, the department doesn't have a choice. We negotiate for the corridor. We don't get to just root around a documented recorded interest without opening ourselves up to a taking claim that'd cost the state a lot more than paying you fair value. What's fair value? Earl asked, same question he'd asked in his own shop 3 weeks back. I can't give you a number today. That takes an appraisal, and appraisals take time. Sowers looked at Wyatt. But I've seen the comps out past Afton. I wouldn't sit on a low offer if I were you when it comes, and I wouldn't let anybody but your attorney negotiate it. There's a family dispute, Wyatt said. My uncle's filed against the estate, says the orchard's not settled property yet. Sowers' face didn't change much, but something in it went careful. That complicates our timeline. We can't finalize acquisition with clouded title. Best thing for you is get that resolved fast, in your favor, on the record. He handed Wyatt a card. There's a planning commission hearing already on the books for the bypass alignment. 3rd week of August, public comment period. If your ownership's confirmed by then, that's a good venue to have your position stated plain in front of everybody who needs to hear it. After he left, Earl stood looking down the row a long minute. That's it then, he said. That's your room. My room for what? For your granddad's whole 60 years to finally get said out loud. Earl put a hand on Wyatt's shoulder, and it was the closest thing to fatherly Wyatt had felt off anybody since the funeral. Dale wants a quiet sale before anybody official's looking. You want it loud, in front of the commission, where his petition and your deed can't hide from each other. Deborah still thinks he's got no legal ground. He doesn't. But scared men don't need ground. They need a headline before the truth catches up to them. Earl looked toward the ridge, toward Route 6 curling down out of the gap. Your granddad planted a fuse 60 years back and let it burn slow on purpose. Man like Dale, he's going to try and stomp it out right at the end, in front of everybody, because that's the only place he's got left to fight. Wyatt looked at the crooked rows running out toward the road, and for the first time the word crooked didn't sit right in his mouth at all. He didn't see crooked. He saw a line, straight as anything, running through 60 years of a man everybody in the county had underestimated on purpose. "Third week of August," he said. "Third week of August," Earl said. "You'd best tell Loyal you're taking that day too." Deborah scheduled the injunction hearing for a Monday morning in the Nelson County Circuit Court, second floor, courtroom 2. Wyatt wore the one collared shirt he owned, ironed by Loyal's wife the night before because Wyatt didn't own an iron. Dale sat across the aisle in a suit that still had store creases in the sleeves. Renata sat beside him, hands folded tight in her lap. Curtis Ambrose stood before either of them, a tall man with silver hair and a leather bag that looked like it cost more than Wyatt's truck. Judge Constance Whitfield came in without ceremony, and everybody stood, and everybody sat back down. "Petition for emergency injunctive relief," she said, reading off the cover sheet. "Mr. Ambrose, it's your motion. Make it quick." "I've got a docket." Ambrose rose, buttoned his jacket. "Your Honor, my client's father left an estate. Part of that estate is a 40-acre parcel that, since probate closed, has revealed itself to carry substantial value tied to a state highway project. We're asking the court to freeze any communication between Wyatt Colson and the Department of Transportation until this court determines whether that parcel was properly distributed." "On what grounds do you say it wasn't properly distributed?" "The will names the parcel plainly, Your Honor. But if the testator possessed material knowledge of its value and withheld that knowledge from co-heirs, that raises questions about the fairness of the whole distribution." Whitfield looked at him over her glasses. "Are you alleging fraud, counselor? Or are you alleging your client didn't ask enough questions before he sold his father's tractor?" A little laugh moved through the gallery. Ambrose didn't flinch. "We're alleging the estate isn't settled until this court says it is. The estate is settled. I have the order in front of me." Whitfield turned to Deborah. "Ms. Kessler." Deborah stood, unhurried. "Your Honor, Hollis Colson wrote a will. He named this parcel to his grandson by tract number and acreage. Probate closed in April. No party objected at the time. Mr. Colson's counsel is now asking this court to unwind a closed estate because his client didn't like what turned up after the fact. Miss Kessler, is there a recorded interest tied to that parcel that predates the will?" "There is, Your Honor. A 1961 right-of-way reservation, recorded in Deed Book 87, page 412, naming Hollis Colson and his heirs as sole grantor of consent for a road corridor." Deborah lifted a folder. "It's already on file with the Department of Transportation's right-of-way office in Charlottesville." Ambrose's head turned, just slightly, toward his own folder. "Your Honor, that document's authenticity hasn't been tested in any court. It's a certified copy of a recorded deed," Deborah said. "It doesn't need testing. It needs reading." Whitfield held up a hand before either lawyer said more. "Here's where I am, and I'll save us all a long afternoon. An injunction is an extraordinary remedy. I don't grant those on a hunch that something might come out wrong later. Mr. Ambrose, do you have a witness, a document, anything showing fraud in how this will was written or how it was probated?" Ambrose hesitated half a second too long. "Not at this time, Your Honor. We'd ask for time to conduct discovery." "You can have discovery. You can't have an injunction while you go find out if you've got a case." She set down her pen. "Motion for emergency injunctive relief is denied." Dale's jaw tightened. Renata put a hand on his arm like she was holding him in the chair. "However," Whitfield went on, and Deborah's shoulders didn't relax yet, "I'm not going to let this drag on for 2 years while a highway department waits on a family fight. I'm setting a hearing on the underlying petition for August 20th. That's a Thursday. Both sides will exchange all relevant records by August 13th. I want bank statements, the will, probate filings, and anything either side has on this 1961 deed, produced and copied, no surprises in my courtroom. August 20th. Wyatt did the math without meaning to. That put it one day after the Planning Commission hearing Sowers had mentioned. Whitfield banged nothing, because judges in Nelson County didn't bother with gavels for scheduling orders, and the room started shuffling before she'd even finished standing. Outside on the courthouse steps, the July heat came down flat and heavy. Earl was waiting by his truck, arms crossed, and Wyatt walked straight to him without looking back at Dale. Judge said no, Wyatt told him. I heard some of it through the window fan in the clerk's office. Earl almost smiled. Whitfield doesn't suffer fools. Never has. Behind them, Ambrose caught up to Deborah at the bottom of the steps, his voice pitched low, but not low enough. Ms. Kessler. A word. Deborah stopped. Wyatt and Earl stayed close enough to hear. You've got a clean-looking document, Ambrose said. I'll grant you that. But a deed from 1961 that sat quiet 60 years, never once acted on, never once mentioned in any transaction, any tax filing, any survey. Courts get skeptical of documents that convenient. It's not convenient, Mr. Ambrose. It's recorded. Deborah's voice stayed even. You're welcome to hunt for a reason it isn't real. I'd start by explaining why the row spacing on that orchard lines up with a state survey center line to within 8 feet. Ambrose's face didn't move, but something behind his eyes did the math and didn't like the answer. We'll see you on the 13th, he said, and walked off toward a car that wasn't a Nelson County plate. Deborah watched him go, then turned to Wyatt. He's going to come after the deed itself now, not the will. The deed. How's he do that? He'll try to say it's a forgery, or that it lapsed, or that some later transaction extinguished it without anybody noticing. She started walking toward her office, and Wyatt and Earl fell in beside her. That's why the fence post matters more now than it did a week ago, the scratch marks, Earl said. Book and page, cut into the wood by Hollis's own hand, 60 years before any of this mattered to anybody. If Ambrose wants to argue this deed appeared out of nowhere, Deborah said, we show the court it's been marked, on the ground, in the same handwriting as the graph tags, since before Wyatt's father was old enough to walk that fence line. That's not convenient. That's a man building a paper trail nobody was supposed to need for 60 years. They reached her office door. She stopped with her hand on it. I want photographs of that post, today, before some brush hog operator clears that fence line and knocks it over without knowing what it is. I'll go now, Wyatt said. Take Earl. 2 witnesses are worth more than one. She looked at both of them, and Wyatt. Ambrose is going to depose you before the 13th. Probably Earl too. Answer plain. Don't guess. Don't explain more than you're asked. Depose, Wyatt repeated. Sit in a room, answer questions under oath. Get it typed up. She opened her door. It's not a trial. It's a man trying to catch you saying something he can twist. Don't give him anything to twist. Wyatt drove out Route 6 with Earl beside him, windows down, the truck's bad muffler drowning out the radio he never turned on anyway. At the northeast corner, the locust post still stood, leaning the same tired lean it had leaned for years, the 2 numbers still scratched shallow into its rotted face. Earl knelt with a rag and wiped 60 years of dirt out of the grooves, while Wyatt took pictures on his phone, close and then wide, the post and the fence line and the ridge behind it all in one frame. You know what gets me, Earl said, still kneeling. Man had cancer eating him alive at the end, still thought 60 years ahead of the people trying to take what was his. He didn't think they'd try this hard. He thought exactly this hard. That's why the numbers are out here and not just in that tin box. Earl stood, knees popping again. He knew somebody'd come looking to poke holes. He left the patch before the hole ever got dug. Wyatt looked down the row toward the ridge, past the crooked trees standing exactly where his grandfather had put them, and for the first time since the funeral, he didn't feel like he was waiting on something to happen to him. He felt like he was standing inside a plan that was still running on schedule, 60 years late and right on time. August 20th, he said. Day after the commission hearing, Earl said. He'd have liked that. making them show their whole hand before he ever showed his. They drove back down Route 6 with the photographs saved, 3 copies each, one set for Deborah and one for Wyatt to keep folded in the glove box, next to nothing at all, which was still more than he'd had 2 months ago. Deborah met Wyatt at her office 2 days before the deposition, coffee going cold between them. Ambrose called, she said. He wants Earl too. Same day, back to back. Why Earl? Because Earl can put the deed in the ground for us, and because Ambrose thinks an old man rattles easy. She slid a legal pad across the desk. He won't rattle, but I want you ready for where this is headed. Which is where? He's going to ask about the chemo trips. Wyatt went still. What's that got to do with a deed? Nothing. Everything, if he can make a jury think it does. She tapped her pen twice. He's going to suggest you spent 2 years alone with a dying man who trusted you, that you had opportunity to influence him, maybe even opportunity to know things nobody else knew. That's a lie. It doesn't have to be true. It has to be asked, on the record, in a tone that makes people wonder. She looked at him steady. Answer short. Don't defend yourself past the question. The truth doesn't need help. The deposition was held in a back conference room at Ambrose's firm in Charlottesville. Glass walls, a court reporter set up in the corner with her little machine clicking soft. Wyatt wore the same collared shirt. Deborah sat beside him. Ambrose sat across, folder open, pen capped. Mr. Coulson, Ambrose said, how many days a week did you drive your grandfather to treatment? 2, sometimes 3. For how long? Almost 2 years. Did anyone else in the family go with you? No. Not your Uncle Dale? No. Not your Aunt Renata? No. Ambrose let that sit a beat. So for 2 years, you were often alone with Hollis Coulson, for hours at a time. Objection. Form, Deborah said, flat. But go ahead and answer, Wyatt. Yes, Wyatt said. We were alone. He was sick. Somebody had to sit with him. Did he ever discuss the will with you during those drives? No. Did he ever mention a highway or a road deal or the state? Wyatt thought back, careful. Once he said the trees weren't planted crooked, said they were planted for a road that hadn't come yet. Ambrose leaned forward. And you understood that to mean what at the time? Nothing. I thought he was just talking. He was on a lot of medicine by then. So you're telling this deposition your grandfather may have been confused when he said it. Objection, Deborah said. He didn't say confused. You did. Ambrose smiled thin and moved on. Did you ever look through his personal papers before he died? No. Never went in his lockbox, his desk, anything like that? Not until after the funeral. And when you did go through his things after the funeral, what did you find? Deborah's hand touched Wyatt's arm. Light. You can answer that generally. Don't get into privileged strategy. I found a tin box, Wyatt said, under a plank in the packing shed. It had a deed in it. Convenient place to hide something worth millions. Objection, Deborah snapped. That's argument, not a question. Strike it or ask something real. Ambrose uncapped his pen, wrote something, capped it again. No further questions for now. Earl went in an hour later. Wyatt waited in the hallway with Deborah, listening to the low murmur through the door, unable to make out words. When Earl came out, he looked more amused than shaken. He asked me if I coached Wyatt on what to say about a lockbox, Earl said, settling his hat back on. I told him I've been surveying property lines in this county since before his firm had a fax machine, and I've never once needed anybody's help remembering a number. What number? Deborah asked. The tag number. 1241. He wanted to know how a boy his age just happened to guess a combination like that. Earl shrugged. I told him it wasn't a guess. It was a dead man's handwriting, sitting right there on a tree, same as it had been sitting there 30 years before Wyatt was born. Man just didn't like the answer. Did he push? He tried to get me to say Hollis was failing, mentally, near the end. I told him Hollis Coulson could still call every apple variety on that mountain by name 3 days before he passed. Told him that's not a man losing his mind. That's a man who knew exactly what he was leaving behind and to who. Deborah almost smiled. That's going to read well. On paper. They walked out to the parking lot together, heat coming up off the asphalt in waves. Earl stopped by his truck. He's grabbing at straws now, Earl said. Undue influence is a hard thing to prove when the only thing anybody influenced was a boy driving an old man to the doctor for free. He knows that, Deborah said. This isn't about winning the deposition. It's about muddying the record before the commission hearing. Something for the newspaper to quote if he leaks it. Wyatt felt his jaw tighten. He'd do that? Man already tried an emergency injunction with no grounds, Deborah said. Don't put anything past him now. 2 days later, Deborah called Wyatt down to the courthouse on Bellamy Street, her voice tight over the phone in a way he hadn't heard yet. "Meet me at the clerk's office," she said. "Bring Earl if you can get him." They found her standing at the deed book counter, a heavy-set clerk named Patsy, paging through a leather-bound volume older than any of them. Deborah had a photocopy spread beside it. When we pulled the certified copy of the 1961 reservation for the DOT file, she said, "I had Patsy check the margin notations too. Most people never look at those, they just copy the deed itself." "What'd you find?" Wyatt asked. Patsy turned the book around so he could see. In the margin, in faded ink, someone had written a short notation and a date. 1974, initialed. "That's a marginal release notation," Deborah said. "Counties use them when a recorded interest gets terminated, paid off, or waived. If the state had ever bought out the reservation, or if Hollis had ever released it, it'd show right here." "And?" Earl said. "There's no release," Patsy said. "That notation's just an address correction from when the county renumbered the roads back in the 70s. The reservation itself was never touched, never modified, never waived by anybody." She closed the book gentle, like it was something that could bruise. "In 13 years working this office, I've seen exactly one deed sit that clean, that long, without anybody trying to unwind it. That's this one." Deborah looked at Wyatt. "This matters more than you know. Ambrose is going to argue somewhere down the line that the reservation lapsed, or that Hollis quietly let it go once the state stopped asking. This margin note kills that argument before he can even raise it." "Can we get a certified copy of the margin note itself?" Wyatt asked. "Already ordered it," Deborah said. $40, same-day service. I want 2 copies in my file by Friday, and a third for the commission packet." Earl ran a thumb along the edge of the old book's binding. "Careful. The way a man handles something he respects." "Your granddad didn't leave this to chance, Wyatt. He didn't just bury a deed and hope. He knew exactly what book this sat in, and he knew exactly nobody in this county would come looking, because nobody thought a dead orchard was worth the trouble. Until now," Wyatt said. "Until now." Deborah gathered her folder. "August 13th, we hand Ambrose everything. The deed, the margin note, Earl's deposition, yours. All of it. No surprises, like Whitfield ordered." "Won't that give him time to come up with something new?" Wyatt asked. "It might," Deborah said, "but it also means when the commission hearing comes and Dale tries to push his sale in front of everybody, there won't be a single document in that room he hasn't already seen and failed to knock down." She looked at Wyatt hard. "That's how you win in front of a public body. Not by surprising them, by being the only side that already showed its whole hand and still stood there clean." Outside, the courthouse steps were empty in the afternoon heat, the flag over the door hanging limp. Wyatt stood a minute looking down Bellamy Street, past the diner and the hardware store, toward the ridge where Route 6 climbed out of town and disappeared into the gap. "Third week of August," he said again, like saying it enough times might slow the days down instead of speeding them up. "Getting close now," Earl said. "Feels like it's been 6 weeks and 6 years, both." Earl put his hat back on against the sun. "Your granddad waited 60 years for this exact stretch of days. You can manage 3 more weeks." They walked to the trucks together, and Wyatt drove back out Route 6 alone, past the fence post with its 2 numbers, past the crooked rows standing patient in the heat, waiting on a hearing that hadn't happened yet. Deborah called on a Tuesday morning, her voice quick in a way that meant she'd found something she didn't like. "I want you to come down here," she said. "Bring your checkbook if you've got one. I don't have a checkbook. I've got $40 and a debit card. Bring both, and sit down first." Wyatt drove into town with the truck's gas light on, parked outside her office, and found her holding a printed notice from the county treasurer. "Your grandfather's back taxes," she said. $1,900 like everybody said all along. Except nobody paid it, and penalties ran while the estate sat in probate. It's $2,340 now, and the county's put the parcel up for the delinquent tax auction. August 18th. Wyatt sat down slow. 2 days before the hearing. 2 days before the hearing. She slid the notice across. If that parcel sells at auction, you don't own it anymore. Somebody else does. Doesn't matter whose name is on the 1961 deed if you're not the one holding the dirt it sits on. Can they even do that? Sell it out from under a deed like that? The reservation runs with the land, so technically it survives a tax sale. But you'd be fighting a stranger for standing instead of fighting Dale. A stranger with a lawyer and money and no reason in the world to hand you anything. She tapped the notice. I don't like coincidences. Somebody let this ride through probate without a word, then a notice goes up 2 days before the exact hearing that matters. Who lets a tax notice just ride? Whoever's supposed to flag it for the estate. Dale, probably, since he was named administrator before you got appointed. He'd have gotten every one of these in the mail. She watched Wyatt's face. I called the treasurer's office already. Somebody's placed an inquiry on the parcel. Wanted the minimum bid and the auction rules read out over the phone. Dale? No. A company. Meridian Infrastructure Partners. She said it flat, like she'd looked it up already and didn't like what she'd found. They're a private contractor. They bid state highway jobs. I pulled the DOT procurement site this morning. Meridian's one of 2 firms shortlisted for the Route 6 bypass construction contract, the same corridor that runs through your rows. Wyatt felt something cold move through his chest. So somebody building the road wants my land before the state even buys it. If Meridian owns the parcel outright, they control the one clean holdout in the whole corridor. They can sell the right-of-way to the state themselves at whatever price they name once their construction bid clears. That's not $2 million split with heirs. That's a contractor pocketing the whole reservation value and building the road on top of it. She sat back. And Ambrose represents Meridian too, has for years. I found him listed as counsel of record on 3 of their other jobs upstate. He never said that. He didn't have to. He just needed you distracted fighting Dale in a probate court while somebody quietly bought the ground under your feet at auction. Deborah stood and walked to the window, arms crossed. This is bigger than a family fight, Wyatt. It always was. Dale's just the door they walked in through. Wyatt sat with that a minute, the numbers turning over in his head. $2,340. $40 in his own pocket. $62 the day he'd moved into the shed, and not much more than that since. I don't have that kind of money, he said. I know. She turned back to him. Which is why we're not waiting on you to find it alone. She picked up her phone and called Earl herself. Put it on speaker so Wyatt could hear. Earl, it's Deborah. I need a favor, and I need it today. Name it. Wyatt's got a tax bill on the orchard. $23.40. If it's not paid by the 18th, the county auctions the parcel, and there's a construction outfit already sniffing around to buy it. There was a pause on the line, short. I'll have a check at your office in an hour. Earl, I'm not asking you to. You didn't ask. I'm offering. His voice didn't change at all. Hollis Colson pulled me off a ditch line in 1979 when my truck slid off Route 6 in an ice storm, middle of the night, and he never once mentioned it again after. A man doesn't forget that kind of debt just because the man's gone. Deborah looked at Wyatt while Earl talked, and Wyatt looked at the floor. I'll pay you back, Wyatt said, leaning toward the phone. Every dollar. You'll pay me back in apples, Earl said. Good crop, 3 years from now, when those grafts you keep watering finally decide to do something. That's the whole interest rate. Now let me get off this line and find my checkbook. The call ended. Deborah looked at Wyatt steady. You've got an hour. Let's go sit at the treasurer's office and make sure that payment post before anybody else's inquiry turns into a bid. The treasurer's office sat 2 doors down from Deborah's, a low counter and a woman named Faye who'd clearly seen every kind of trouble Nelson County could produce. Earl arrived with a folded check and set it on the counter without a word. Parcel 14-22, Deborah said. Colson. We need this posted today, and we need written confirmation the parcel's pulled from the delinquent auction list. Faye typed, squinted at her screen, typed again. $23.40 even. I can post it right now. She ran the check, printed a receipt, and stamped it twice, hard, like she wanted it to matter. There. Parcel's current. It comes off the auction list by end of day. You mentioned an inquiry earlier, Deborah said. On this same parcel, can you tell us who called? Faye hesitated, then shrugged. Public auction list, nothing private about who's asking. Man gave a company name, Meridian something, asked what the minimum bid was, asked if back taxes were the only lien recorded. She handed the receipt across, told him yes. Now I guess I get to tell him somebody beat him to it. You have a name? Whoever called? Faye checked her notes. Didn't leave one. Just the company. She looked at Wyatt for the first time, taking him in, the boots and the sunburn and the receipt he was folding careful into his shirt pocket, like it was worth more than the $23.40 past the $2,000. You're the Colson boy, the one that drove Hollis to Charlottesville all the months. Yes, ma'am. He came in here himself once, years back, paid his taxes early every single year till the year he got sick. Man hated owing anybody a dime. She slid the receipt book shut. Glad somebody kept that up for him. Outside on the sidewalk, Earl put his hat back on. $23.40, he said. Cheapest insurance policy I ever bought. I mean it, Earl. I'll pay you back. I know you will. Earl looked down Bellamy Street toward the courthouse, then back at Wyatt. But you understand what just happened here. They tried to buy your ground for $2,300 and change. Same ground that's sitting on a road worth better than $2 million. He shook his head slow. That's not a company making a mistake. That's a company that knew exactly what your grandfather buried and figured you'd never notice the ground going up for sale under you. Deborah folded her arms, watching the traffic ease down the street toward the Gap, which means Meridian already knows what's in that deed, somebody told them. Or somebody at that firm read the same recorded reservation we did, the same week we pulled it. Ambrose, Wyatt said. Ambrose, Deborah agreed. Which means he wasn't just building a case for Dale in that courtroom. He was building one for a client with a lot more at stake than a farmhouse and a savings account. She started walking back toward her office, and the two of them fell in step beside her. I want everything I've got on Meridian by Friday. Their contracts, their bid filings, any correspondence Ambrose has sent on their letterhead. If they tried to buy this parcel out from under you at a tax sale, that's not just aggressive lawyering. That's a company trying to get in front of a right-of-way they know is about to become worth a fortune. Can we use that at the hearing? We can use it to show the commission exactly why this needs to move slow and careful, in the open, with everybody's interest on the table. She stopped at her door, keys in hand. Dale thinks he's fighting you for a piece of land. Ambrose and Meridian are fighting for the whole corridor. Those aren't the same fight, and only one side in that room is going to understand the difference before the vote happens. Wyatt looked back down the street toward the treasurer's office. At Faye's window, at Earl, already climbing back into his truck like the whole errand had cost him nothing at all. $23.40, he said again, mostly to himself. Cheapest deed insurance you'll ever own, Earl called from the truck window. Wait till you hear what the other side's about to spend trying to catch up. 2 days after the tax payment posted, a car Wyatt didn't recognize turned in off Route 6 and idled at the top of the driveway. It was silver, clean, out of place against the rust and gravel. A man got out in a golf shirt and pressed khakis, sunglasses pushed up on his head. He carried a leather folder like it cost more than Wyatt's truck. Wyatt Colson? That's me. Grant Holloway. I'm with Meridian Infrastructure Partners. He put out a hand. Wyatt shook it, slow. Heard the name, Wyatt said. Treasurer's office mentioned you. Holloway smiled like that didn't bother him at all. Word travels fast in a small county. I'll get right to it. Meridian's interested in this parcel. All 40 acres. We can close in 10 days, cash, no financing contingency. Interested in dead trees and back taxes? Interested in the land, Holloway said. We like the road frontage. The access off Route 6. Wyatt let that sit a second. Funny. Man from the DOT stood right about where you're standing and told me the state might need a strip of it. Now a construction company wants the whole 40. Holloway's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. We like to plan ahead. How much? $180,000. Holloway said it smooth, like it was generous. That's more than double what the county assessor has this parcel valued at. Cash. No inspection contingency. You could have it in your account by the end of the month. Wyatt thought about Faye's receipt folded in his shirt pocket. $2,340, $62 the day he moved into the shed. $180,000 was more money than he'd ever seen in his life, and he knew it, standing there in boots with a hole starting in the left one. That's a strange number, Wyatt said, for dead land. We think it has potential, agricultural potential mostly. Holloway opened the folder, held out a single page. This is just a letter of intent, Non-binding. Take a few days. Wyatt didn't take it. I've got a lawyer, he said. Deborah Voss over on Bellamy Street. Anything with my name on it goes through her first. Holloway's jaw tightened, just barely. Of course. We're happy to work with counsel. Then you can send it to her office. Wyatt stepped back toward the rows. Not much reason for you to keep standing in my driveway. Holloway looked past him at the orchard, the crooked lines running up toward the ridge, and for a second his face gave something away. Not disappointment, calculation. $180,000 is a real offer, Mr. Coulson. Land like this doesn't get offers twice. Then I guess I'll find that out, Wyatt said. Holloway got back in the car. He didn't offer his hand again. The silver car rolled back down the driveway and turned onto Route 6, and Wyatt stood there a long minute before he went inside the shed and called Deborah. He offered you what? Deborah's voice came sharp through the phone. 180,000, 10-day close, said it was for the road frontage. That's not road frontage money, that's keep your mouth shut money. She was quiet a second. Did you sign anything? No, ma'am. Told him to send it to you. Good. Don't sign a napkin for that man, Wyatt. Not a grocery list. She exhaled. Come into the office. There's something else you need to see, and I'd rather show you than tell you over the phone. He drove in with the windows down, the offer letter Holloway had left on the porch rail sitting on the passenger seat, unsigned. Deborah's office smelled like coffee gone cold. She had a fax spread across her desk, a letterhead Wyatt didn't know. Ambrose sent this over this morning, she said. Filed with the clerk of court an hour ago, too. What is it? Dale's filed a new petition. She turned it around so he could read the caption. In re estate of Hollis Coulson, petition to determine distribution of after discovered asset. Wyatt read the words twice. After discovered asset? The right-of-way reservation, Deborah said. Dale's lawyer is arguing that the deed wasn't part of the specific bequest to you, that the will gave you the orchard parcel, but the reservation interest, the actual legal right to grant or deny the corridor, belongs to Hollis's heirs generally, not just whoever inherited the dirt. He wants a piece of it. He wants half at least, maybe more, since he's arguing Renata has a claim too, through him. Deborah tapped the page. It's not a bad argument on its face. Deeds don't always follow land the way people assume. If the reservation was drafted to run to Hollis Coulson and his heirs, a judge could read that as every heir, not just the one who got the specific 40 acres. Wyatt sat down slow in the chair across from her desk. So he laughs at me at the will reading, calls it a graveyard, sells the tractor before the ink's dry, and now he wants half of it back. That's exactly it. Deborah's voice was flat, but her eyes weren't. He didn't want the orchard until he found out the orchard was never really the point. Can he win that? Depends on the judge, and depends on how the 1961 deed is worded exactly. I need to read the reservation clause again, word for word, not just what Earl remembers or what we skimmed at the courthouse counter. She pulled the certified copy from her file, spread it flat, put her finger under a line near the bottom. Right here, grantor reserves unto himself, his heirs and assigns, the exclusive right to convey or withhold consent for any future public right-of-way through the above-described parcel. Say what that means. Plain. It means the right isn't loose. It's tied to the land. She looked up. His heirs and assigns is standard language, Wyatt. It just means the reservation transfers with whoever owns the parcel, generation to generation. It's not carving out a separate inheritance for every relative Hollis ever had. It's saying the right follows the dirt. So Dale's wrong. Dale's lawyer knows he's wrong. He's betting a judge won't take the time to read it that carefully before the hearing date, and he's betting the newspaper picks up the filing before anyone corrects it. She sat back. This isn't about winning the petition, same as before. It's about noise, muddy water, something for Meridian's lawyers to point at if the commission gets cold feet. Ambrose again, Ambrose again. She closed the folder. I want you to understand something, Wyatt. Every time this gets harder, it's because you're getting closer, not further away. Dale doesn't file a petition like this over land he thinks is worthless. Holloway doesn't drive out here with $180,000 for road frontage nobody wants. She met his eyes. They're scared. Both of them. That's not a bad place for us to be standing. Wyatt looked down at the offer letter still folded in his hand. What do I do with this? Nothing for now. I'll send Meridian a letter confirming you're represented and that any future contact goes through this office. If they come back with a bigger number, that tells us even more than the first one did." She stood, walked to the window. "I'll file a response to Dale's petition by the end of the week. It won't be hard. The language is clear, and Patsy already pulled us a clean copy of the whole deed book page, not just the reservation paragraph. Once a judge sees the full context, this goes nowhere fast. And the commission hearing? Still August 20th. Nothing about this petition slows that down unless Dale's lawyer gets it in front of a judge for an emergency ruling, and there's no emergency here. He's asking a probate court to reinterpret a recorded instrument. That takes months, not weeks." She turned back to him. "Which means Dale's petition will still be sitting open, unresolved, the exact same day the commission votes on your deed. He's going to walk into that hearing waving a filing that hasn't gone anywhere, hoping it looks scarier than it is." Wyatt thought about that a second. Will it work? Looking scarier than it is? Not if we get there first. Deborah picked her pen back up. "I want the response filed, certified copies of the full deed page in the hearing packet, and Earl's statement notarized, all before the 14th. When Dale stands up in that room and mentions a pending claim, I want the commission holding paperwork that already answers it." She walked him to the door. Outside, the heat had settled into the kind of afternoon where the cicadas didn't even bother slowing down. "One more thing," she said. "Holloway's offer, $180,000. Yeah, write that number down somewhere, you'll remember it. Not to take it, just to remember what a scared company thinks silence is worth." She held the door for him. "Because in 5 weeks, if this goes the way I think it will, you're going to hear a number a lot bigger than that. And I want you to know exactly how far apart those two figures are. That's the whole case, Wyatt. That gap. That's what your granddad buried in a tin box and waited 60 years to hand you." 2 mornings later, Wyatt was out in the rows before 6, the way he'd been every day since the funeral. He knelt by the 2 grafted trees near the fence line and poured water slow around the base of each one. Habit, not hope. Hollis had asked him once to water these 2 years back, and he'd never had to ask twice. He heard the car before he saw it. Same silver sedan, same driveway, same cloud of dust hanging behind it in the morning light. Holloway got out slower this time. No sunglasses pushed up, no easy smile. "Mr. Coulson, Mr. Holloway." Wyatt set the watering can down. "Didn't figure I'd see you twice. I told you land like this doesn't get offers twice." Holloway held up both hands like he wanted Wyatt to know he came unarmed. "I'm here to prove myself wrong. You talked to my lawyer? Meridian's counsel is in touch with Ms. Voss, yes." Holloway reached into the car and came back with the same leather folder, thicker now. "But I wanted you to hear this number from me directly. Face to face, $410,000. Wyatt didn't say anything for a second. The cicadas kept going in the trees behind him like nothing in the world had changed. "Twice what you offered Tuesday," he said finally, "little more than twice." Holloway's voice had gone careful, like a man walking a beam. "Cash. Closing in 5 days. We'd waive inspection entirely. Funny how fast a company decides dead land's worth that much more. We reassess the frontage value." Holloway held the folder out. "This is a serious number, Mr. Coulson. It's not going to sit on the table forever." Wyatt looked past him, down toward the gap where Route 6 bent out of sight. $2 million, Deborah had said. More than $2 million once the DOT had to buy it outright instead of hoping to scare it loose for pocket change. $410,000, Wyatt said slow, testing the number in his mouth. "Y'all offered $180 on Tuesday. Now it's more'n double, 3 days later. That's not reassessing frontage. That's somebody upstairs getting nervous." Holloway's jaw worked. Just barely. "I wouldn't read into it. I already have." Wyatt picked the watering can back up. "Send it to Deborah Voss's office. Same as before. I don't sign anything standing in a driveway. You understand what you're turning down. I understand exactly what I'm turning down." Wyatt looked at him steady. "See? My granddad kept something buried in this ground for 60 years because he wouldn't let anybody scare him off it. I don't figure I'm going to be the one who does." Holloway didn't answer that. He put the folder back in the car, and this time, he didn't look back at the trees on his way out. Wyatt drove into town that afternoon with the second offer letter on the seat beside him, still unsigned, same as the first. He found Deborah at her desk with papers spread in 3 directions and Patsy typing hard enough to rattle the keyboard. 410, Deborah said. Once he'd told her the number. She wrote it on a legal pad and underlined it twice. That's not a company buying frontage, Wyatt. That's a company that just found out how much this corridor is actually worth and is trying to get out ahead of it before the hearing. You said I'd hear a bigger number. I didn't think it'd come this fast. She tapped her pen against the pad, which tells me something's pushing them. Somebody inside Meridian just ran the real numbers on that bypass and panicked. Patsy looked up from her desk. Might be able to tell you who. Deborah turned. What did you find? State corporation records. Patsy slid a printed page across the desk. Meridian Infrastructure Partners, registered in Virginia, 2019. I pulled their registered agent filing this morning, just to see who signs for them. Deborah picked up the page. Wyatt watched her eyes move down it, then stop. Ambrose and Hale, she read out loud. Registered agent for Meridian Infrastructure Partners since 2019. She set the page down slow. Same firm representing Dale in the estate matter. Same lawyer, Patsy said. Vernon Ambrose signs both filings. His name's on Meridian's incorporation papers and on Dale's petition. Wyatt felt something go cold in his chest that had nothing to do with the shed's bad wiring. He's working for both of them. He's been working for Meridian the whole time, Deborah said. Dale's just the wedge he's using to get there. She sat back, and for a second she looked less like a lawyer and more like a woman doing arithmetic she didn't like the answer to. Patsy, pull whatever billing disclosures are public. If Meridian's paying that firm a retainer, I want the number. Patsy was already back at her keyboard. It took her 4 minutes. Filed with a state contractor registration 2 years back, she said. Legal services line item, $12,000 a month, standing retainer, Ambrose and Hale. Deborah wrote that down too. $12,000 a month for 2 years. That's better than $280,000 Meridian's already spent making sure this corridor comes to them quiet. She looked up at Wyatt. Dale thinks Ambrose is fighting for him. Ambrose is running Dale like a decoy, so the commission never asked the real question, which is who already knew about the reservation before anybody dug up a tin box. Wyatt sat down across from her, hard, like his legs had finally caught up to the last 3 days. Does that help us? It helps us more than I can say out loud in this office. Deborah's voice had an edge to it now, quiet and pleased at once. A lawyer representing an heir in a probate matter, while his firm's on retainer with a company trying to buy the same land the heir's fighting over, that's not aggressive. That's a conflict of interest a bar complaint's made of. You gonna file one? Not yet. Right now it's a card and I'm not playing it till it does the most damage. She capped her pen. Filing a complaint tips Ambrose off that we know. Sitting on it means he walks into that hearing thinking his angle's still hidden. I'd rather he find out in the room, in front of the commission, same time everybody else does. Dale still doesn't know, Wyatt said. Does he? That Ambrose is working 2 sides. I doubt it. Deborah looked almost sorry saying it. Dale thinks he's got a lawyer fighting to get him a piece of your inheritance. He doesn't know that lawyer's real client wants the whole corridor cheap, and Dale's petition is just noise to keep the commission looking the wrong direction while Meridian works you in private. Wyatt thought about Dale at the will reading, tossing him a folder across the table and laughing. Good luck selling a graveyard boy. He wondered if Dale even understood yet what he'd handed away along with it. He's gonna find out, Wyatt said. He is, just not from us. Deborah stood and walked to the window, the same way she had 2 days before. Right now, our job's simpler than his. We get every piece of paper in order. The deed page, Earl's statement. The fence post number matched against the courthouse plat. All of it. Notarized, indexed, ready before the 14th. And the 410,000? Write it down next to the first number. Deborah came back to her desk and slid the legal pad across so Wyatt could see both figures stacked one over the other. 180,000, 410,000. That's the gap closing, Wyatt. Every time it closes, it tells you how scared they are of the number underneath it, which is 2 million something. 2.3 by the assessor's own corridor comps, once the state's forced to pay market instead of hoping you'd take a scared man's offer first. She sat back down. Holloway's not going to stop. He'll come back a 3rd time before this is over, and it'll be bigger still. I want you ready for that. And I want you knowing exactly why it keeps climbing. Wyatt folded the second offer letter and put it with the first one, in the same drawer at the shed where he kept Faye's tax receipt and the folded corner of the deed book page. 3 pieces of paper now, each one worth more than the last, each one proof of something Dale and Holloway both wanted to pretend wasn't true. That evening, he walked the rows again before dark, watering can in hand, the two grafted trees drinking slow the way they always did. Earl's truck came up the driveway just as the sun dropped behind the ridge, headlights catching the crooked lines of trees planted 60 years before anybody but Hollis knew what they were for. Earl got out, notarized statement in hand, already signed, already stamped. "Brought this by myself instead of making you drive in for it," he said. "Figured you had enough people showing up in that driveway lately without me adding to it." Two, actually. Same one. Twice. Wyatt took the statement, read the county seal at the bottom. Holloway came back with more money. How much more? $410,000. Earl let out a low whistle, the kind that meant something more than surprise. "Boy," he said, "that man's company is about to find out the hard way what your granddad already knew the day he buried that box." He looked out over the dead rows, dark now, the ridgeline black against a sky still holding on to the last of the light. Some ground doesn't answer to money. It answers to who's got the paper. Patsy found the filing 4 days later, buried in the online agenda packet for the Nelson County Board of Supervisors. "It's not just probate anymore," she said, turning her monitor so Deborah could see. Ambrose petitioned the board directly. "Wants an agenda item added for August 20th. Emergency acquisition, ahead of the regular corridor vote." Deborah leaned over the screen and read it twice. Emergency acquisition of what? 40 acres. Colson Orchard parcel. He's asking the county to condemn it now at the last assessed value, before, and I'm quoting, "unresolved title disputes inflate the purchase price beyond what public funds should bear." Wyatt felt his stomach drop somewhere near his boots. "They want to buy it out from under me. Cheap." Before the deed even gets read out loud, that's exactly what they want. Deborah's voice stayed even, but her hand had gone still on the mouse. "Last assessed value on that parcel is $81,000. Back taxes owed, structure's worthless. That's the number sitting in the county's own book." 81,000. Wyatt said it slow, like it tasted bad. "Holloway offered me 410 just last week, because Holloway knows what it's really worth. The county assessor doesn't, not yet, and Ambrose is betting he can get a vote through before anybody corrects the record." Deborah sat back. "This is the whole play, Wyatt. Dale's probate petition was never about winning. It just needed to exist long enough to give Ambrose a reason to stand up in front of the board and say there's a cloud on the title. That's his opening. That's how he gets the commission to move fast instead of careful. Can they do that? Just take it? Eminent domain, if the board votes for it? Yes, they can. And once they vote, the price is locked to whatever number they use that day." She closed the laptop screen halfway, which is why the deed page and Earl's statement and that fence post number all have to be sitting in front of them before anybody calls for a vote, not after. Wyatt drove out to Earl's place that same evening, the light going long and gold over the ridge, and found him on the back porch, oiling a hinge that didn't need oiling. "They're trying to move on it," Wyatt said, and told him the number, 81,000. Earl set the oil can down hard enough to make the porch boards jump. "That's robbery with a gavel." He wiped his hands on his jeans. "Let's go make sure that fence post's still saying what I remember it saying." They drove out together in Earl's truck, down the switchback, past the shed, out to the tree line where the old boundary fence still stood, half fallen, posts gray and split with age. Earl walked the line slow, running his hand along the top rail until he stopped at the fourth post from the corner. Here. He knelt, brushed dirt and lichen away from a low scratch mark, faint but there. Numbers old, cut deep with a knife or an awl. 141-6. "Deed book page," Wyatt said. "Deed book page." Earl looked up at him. "Your granddad didn't trust paper he couldn't double-check twice. He put the book and page number where nobody'd think to look for it, low on a fence post nobody looks at anyway." He pulled a small notepad from his shirt pocket, the same one he'd used to sketch section lines 40 years back, and copied the mark down exact. Back at Deborah's office the next morning, Patsy pulled the certified deed book page fresh from the courthouse and laid it next to Earl's notepad, book 141, page 6. Patsy turned the certified copy around so everyone could see the stamp in the corner. Same book, same page. Matches the reservation clause word for word. Deborah looked at it a long moment, then at Wyatt. "Your granddad left himself a receipt," she said. in case anybody ever tried to say the deed didn't exist, or wasn't real, or got lost in some fire 40 years ago. He carved the proof into a fence post where it'd outlast every one of us standing here. He didn't trust anybody, Wyatt said. He trusted you. Deborah slid the notepad into her exhibit folder. That's different. The days after moved fast and close together, the kind of stretch where nothing feels separate from anything else. Deborah filed her response to Dale's probate petition, and a judge in Charlottesville set it for a hearing date that wouldn't come before September, which meant it would still be open, unresolved, the day the board voted. Patsy indexed every exhibit into a binder thick enough to double as a doorstop, tabbed and labeled the deed page, Earl's notarized statement, the fence post photograph, the plat map with the corridor center line drawn straight through 40 rows of dead trees. Holloway didn't come back a third time. Deborah said that told her something too. He's not authorized to go higher without board approval, she said, which means Meridian's waiting on the same vote we are. If the county condemns cheap, Meridian never has to pay full price at all. That's the whole reason Ambrose is pushing this hearing instead of a courtroom. A courtroom takes months. A 5-minute vote takes 5 minutes. So August 20th decides everything. August 20th decides everything. Deborah closed the binder. I want you there at 8, dressed like you mean it, Earl too. I'll have the folder, but I want that room looking at the people this land actually belongs to, not just papers on a table. The morning of the hearing came in gray and close, the kind of heat that sits on a body before the sun's even fully up. Wyatt put on the one collared shirt he owned, the same one from the will reading, 6 weeks and a lifetime ago. He drove into Tanner's Gap past the feed store, past the courthouse on Bellamy Street with its worn stone steps, and parked where Earl's truck was already waiting. Engine off, Earl leaning against the tailgate in a pressed shirt of his own. Big turnout, Earl said, nodding toward the lot. Cars lined both sides of the street, more than Wyatt had ever seen for a board meeting. Word got around. Word always gets around in a county this size. Earl fell into step beside him. Questions just whether it got around to the right people. Inside, the meeting room was already half full, ceiling fans turning slow overhead, doing nothing against the heat. Wyatt saw Dale first, sitting near the front in a shirt too new for him, Vernon Ambrose beside him in a gray suit, folder open on his knee. Renata sat one row back, arms crossed, eyes on the door like she was watching for someone. Deborah was already at a side table, binder squared in front of her, Patsy beside her with a second folder of copies. Sit up front, Deborah said quietly when Wyatt reached her, where the board can see you when they need to. They gonna call it today? A vote? Ambrose is going to try. Deborah didn't look up from her papers. I need you calm, and I need you quiet, until it's time not to be. The chairman gavelled the meeting to order at 8:15, and the room went still enough that Wyatt could hear the fans ticking overhead. Dale sat forward in his chair. Ambrose uncapped a pen. Item 4, the chairman said, reading off a printed agenda. Emergency petition regarding acquisition of the Colson Orchard parcel, corridor right-of-way, Route 6 realignment project. Ambrose stood, buttoning his jacket, folder in hand. Members of the board, he said, my client's family has a straightforward request. Wyatt felt Earl's hand land steady on his shoulder from the row behind, and he made himself sit still, the way Deborah had asked, and wait. Ambrose opened his folder slow, like a man who already knew how the next 5 minutes would go. The Colson Orchard parcel, he said, sits under an active probate dispute. Titles clouded, ownerships contested. My client, Dale Colson, believes the county's best interest is served by acquiring the parcel now, at its current assessed value, before that dispute inflates a number nobody's obligated to pay. The chairman glanced at his packet, and that assessed value is $81,000, Ambrose said. Per the county's own book, back taxes of $1,900 would be settled out of proceeds. A murmur ran through the room. Wyatt kept his eyes forward, the way Deborah told him to. Mr. Colson, the chairman said, looking past Ambrose to Dale, you're the petitioner of record in this parcel's probate matter? Dale stood halfway, tugged his new shirt straight. Yes, sir. Family land. Ought to be settled clean, not dragged out. And you support the county taking it now at $81,000? I do. Dale sat back down, satisfied, like he'd just closed on the auto shop lease all over again. Deborah rose before the chairman finished nodding. Deborah Whitfield, representing Wyatt Colson, the record title holder of the parcel in question. Her voice carried without her raising it. Before this board votes on any acquisition, there's something in the deed record it needs to hear. The chairman looked at Ambrose, then back at her. Go ahead, counselor. Deborah opened the binder Patsy had built. She didn't rush it. Nelson County Deed Book 141, page 6, she said. Recorded 1961. A right-of-way reservation clause executed by Hollis Colson, naming Hollis Colson and his heirs as the sole party able to grant consent for any highway corridor crossing this parcel. She held up the certified copy. That reservation was never revoked. It's still good today. That's an old filing, Ambrose said, standing. Superseded by decades of... Superseded by nothing, Deborah said. I'd invite the board to check the recorder's confirmation filed 4 days ago, right here in this county, stating the reservation remains active and unamended. Patsy slid a second document across to the clerk's desk without being asked. The chairman took it, read it twice, and set it down slower than he'd picked it up. There's more, Deborah said. The corridor center line your own transportation survey drew last month runs straight through 40 rows of orchard trees planted in 1961. Same year as this reservation, same man planted both. She nodded once, and Wyatt understood it was his turn to sit very still and let the next part land. Mr. Ferris, Deborah said, would you confirm for the board what you found on the boundary fence? Earl stood from the row behind Wyatt, hat in his hands. Fourth post from the corner, he said. Scratched in by hand, 60 years back, book 141-6. Same number counsel just read you. He looked at the board, not at Dale. Hollis Colson didn't leave that mark for nobody to find by accident. He left it so somebody could prove it later. The room had gone quiet in a way it hadn't been all morning. So the reservation stands, the chairman said slowly, which means this board has no authority to condemn this parcel at $81,000 or at any figure without Wyatt Colson's consent as the named heir, Deborah said. The State Department of Transportation owes fair market value for that corridor, not a county's 40-year-old tax assessment. Comparable corridor acquisitions in this county have run north of $2 million for parcels a third this size. Ambrose's jaw tightened. This is a distraction from the matter at hand. It's the matter at hand, Deborah said. And while we're on distractions... She let a beat sit there. Mr. Ambrose's firm has held a standing legal retainer with Meridian Infrastructure Partners since 2019. $12,000 a month. Better than $280,000 paid to date. Meridian is the private buyer currently negotiating for this same corridor. A ripple went through the room, sharper this time. Mr. Ambrose is representing Dale Colson's petition, Deborah said, while his firm is on retainer with the company standing to profit most from this board condemning the parcel cheap. I'd ask the board to weigh whose interest that petition actually serves before it votes on anything today. The chairman set his pen down. Mr. Ambrose, is that retainer accurate? Ambrose didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. I'd like a recess, he said finally. You'll get one, the chairman said. But this board isn't voting on an emergency condemnation with a live deed reservation and an unresolved conflict sitting in the same file. Item 4 is tabled, pending review by county council. Dale shot up out of his chair. That's my land too. Half of whatever that thing's worth. Sit down, Mr. Colson, the chairman said, not unkindly. Just done. Nobody's deciding what anybody owns today. Dale sat, slow, the color gone out of his face. He looked back at Wyatt like he was trying to find the boy who used to load feed sacks for him and couldn't quite locate him in the room anymore. Wyatt didn't smile. He didn't need to. He thought about the will reading 6 weeks back, Dale tossing that folder across the table with a laugh. Good luck selling a graveyard, boy. He leaned toward Earl just loud enough for Earl to hear. Guess we sold it after all. Earl's mouth twitched. Close to a grin, he didn't let all the way out. Outside, the heat had broken a little, clouds building over the ridge the way they did most July afternoons before a storm rolled through. Reporters from the Nelson County paper and a Charlottesville television crew were already working the sidewalk, angling for anybody who'd talk. Renata caught Wyatt by the courthouse steps before he reached his truck, arms still crossed, but something different in her face now. Dale didn't know, she said. About the retainer, I want you to know that much. Maybe not, Wyatt said. He knew about the orchard, though. Knew Grandpa never sold it. Never asked why. She didn't have an answer for that. She just nodded once and walked back toward Dale, who stood by his truck alone, staring at nothing in particular. Deborah found Wyatt by the truck a few minutes later, binder under her arm, sunglasses pushed up into her hair. That's the vote stopped, she said. It's not the money yet, but it's the only vote that mattered. What happens now? Now the state has to come to you direct. No condemnation, no shortcut. DOT counsel, real appraisal, real negotiation. She looked at him steady. That's a different conversation than the one you've been having with Holloway. Bigger number, bigger number. She almost smiled. Go home, Wyatt, water your trees. I'll call you when DOT's ready to talk. Wyatt drove home with the windows down, the storm clouds breaking apart over the ridge behind him. He pulled in at the shed, cut the engine, and sat there a minute before he got out. The two grafted trees stood at the end of row 9, same as always. He filled the bucket at the spigot and carried it down anyway, even though nothing in the world had changed about how thirsty those trees were. Earl's truck pulled in behind his 10 minutes later. He came down the row with a folded newspaper under his arm. Made the front page already, Earl said. Charlottesville paper, not just ours. Wyatt set the bucket down. What's it say? Says a Nelson County board tabled a condemnation vote after a title dispute surfaced. Earl handed it over. Doesn't mention your name till paragraph 6. Doesn't need to. Wyatt read it standing in the dirt, ink smudging a little under his thumb. He folded it back up and set it on a fence post, weighted down with a rock like it belonged there as much as anything else. The call from Deborah came 4 days later, a Tuesday, while Wyatt was stacking feed bags at the store. DOT counsel reached out, she said. Name's Priscilla Nunn, Assistant Attorney General's Office, Transportation Division. She wants a sit-down, preliminary appraisal, corridor easement terms, the whole thing. When? Friday. My office. Bring Earl if he'll come. She'll want somebody who can speak to the survey. Friday came hot and still, cicadas going in the trees outside Deborah's window. Priscilla Nunn was younger than Wyatt expected, maybe 35, a leather folder under her arm, and no patience for small talk. Mr. Colson, she said, shaking his hand once, firm. I'll be direct. The reservation clause is valid. Our office confirmed it against the recorder's copy Monday morning. So what's it worth? Wyatt said. The corridor. She opened the folder. Preliminary figure based on comparable right-of-way acquisitions in Nelson and Albemarle counties over the last 5 years. $2.43 million. Nobody in the room said anything for a second. That's before survey costs are finalized, she added. Could move either direction. Rarely moves down. Earl let out a breath like he'd been holding it since the hearing. $2.4 million, he said. For 40 acres of dead trees. For the right-of-way, Priscilla said. Not the trees. The corridor's 110 feet wide, runs the length of the parcel. State needs it clear to break ground by next spring if the realignment stays on schedule. Deborah slid a legal pad toward Wyatt. This is where you get a say, Wyatt. Full buyout of the corridor strip, or an easement with annual payments and you keep the land around it. Different numbers, different trade-offs. Wyatt looked at the pad a long moment. Grandpa held on to this land 60 years, he said. Held on to all 40 acres. Not just the strip. You don't have to decide today, Priscilla said. I know what I want, Wyatt said. Sell the corridor. Keep the rest of the orchard. Deborah nodded slow, like that was the answer she'd been hoping for. Then we'll draft it that way. The probate hearing came the second week of September, a Charlottesville courtroom smaller than Wyatt expected. Wood-paneled, a ceiling fan turning slower than the one in the county meeting room had. Dale sat at the petitioner's table without a lawyer this time. Ambrose's name hadn't come up again after the retainer got read into the county record. Word was he'd stopped returning Dale's calls the same week. The judge, a woman with silver hair pulled back tight, looked over the file before she said anything. Mr. Colson, she said to Dale, your petition alleges the estate distribution improperly excluded you from proceeds tied to Parcel 4. That's right, Dale said. Half that money's mine. I'm his son. Your petition was filed on the premise that the parcel's value was uncertain, pending resolution of a title dispute. The judge turned a page. County Council and the State Attorney General's office have both since confirmed the title. There is no dispute. The reservation names Hollis Colson and his heirs. Wyatt Colson is the named heir of record on this parcel, under the will you yourself did not contest at the time of probate. I didn't know what it was worth then, Dale said. Nobody did. That may be true, the judge said, not unkindly, but it isn't a basis for reopening a distribution you accepted 6 weeks ago. She closed the file. This petition is dismissed for lack of standing. Dale sat there a second like the words hadn't reached him yet. Then he stood, buttoned nothing because he had no jacket to button, and walked out without looking at Wyatt. Wyatt found him in the parking lot afterward, leaning against his truck, the same truck he'd loaded feed sacks into 100 times as a kid. Dale. Dale turned, eyes red-rimmed, older looking than Wyatt remembered him being 6 weeks back. Come to gloat? No. Wyatt stopped a few feet off. Came to say something. Say it then. Grandpa didn't leave you out because he was punishing you, Wyatt said. He left me that orchard because he trusted I'd keep walking it. That's all it ever was. Dale looked at the ground. I sold his tractor for scrap money, Wyatt, 6 weeks after he died. I know. Renata wanted the cash quick. I didn't stop her. He shook his head. Man drove me to Little League for 10 years and I couldn't wait a month to clean out his shed. Wyatt didn't have an answer that made that smaller. He let it sit. I'm not saying we're square, Wyatt said finally, but there's an easement payment coming every year, long as that corridor sits there. County's going to reassess the rest of the parcel too, once the state's done with their part. If you ever need help again, come ask. Don't file paper against me to get it. Dale's jaw worked like he wanted to say something and couldn't land on it. Your grandfather would have liked hearing you say that, he said finally. Wouldn't have liked how I made you say it. No, Wyatt said. He wouldn't have. He didn't offer his hand and Dale didn't ask for it. Some things stayed unfinished, and Wyatt had learned enough that summer to know that was allowed too. The survey crew came out to the orchard the following week, orange stakes and a laser level, marking the corridor center line fresh against the old row lines. Wyatt watched from the shed steps, while Earl walked the line with the lead surveyor, pointing out where the reservation plat matched ground truth foot for foot. Rows still line up, Earl called back to him, 60 years later, dead on. Wyatt walked out to where the stake sat between row 9 and row 10, right where the crooked trees had always leaned toward the fence line instead of square with the others. He crouched down and put his hand flat against the bark of the nearest one, same as he had that morning with the bucket, same as every morning since Hollis died. Wasn't crooked at all, he said, quiet, mostly to himself. Just early. The closing happened on a Wednesday morning in October, 6 weeks after the survey stakes went in. Deborah's office smelled like coffee and printer toner. Priscilla Nunn sat across the table with a folder 3 inches thick. Final number, Priscilla said, $2,510,000. For the corridor easement, permanent, plus a construction disturbance allowance for the rows we'll have to clear. Wyatt looked at the number twice before it made any sense as ink on paper. Back taxes get paid straight out of closing, Deborah said. $1,900, settled before a dollar reaches you. And the rest of the parcel, Wyatt said. The 30 acres outside the corridor. Stays yours? Priscilla said. State's got no interest in dead trees, just the road under them. Earl sat in the corner chair, hat in his lap, saying nothing, the way he did when a thing was too big to comment on right away. Wyatt signed where Deborah's finger pointed, 4 times, his hand steadier than he expected it to be. When it was done, Priscilla slid a check across the table, and for a second, nobody moved to pick it up. $2.5 million, Earl said finally, low. Hollis used to say that road'd come one day. Don't think even he figured the number. He didn't need the number, Wyatt said. He just needed somebody to keep the ground. Outside, the courthouse clock on Bellamy Street read 11:15. Wyatt folded the check into his jacket pocket like it was nothing more than a grocery receipt, though his hand didn't leave the pocket the whole walk to the truck. Earl walked with him. Bank's 2 blocks that way, Earl said. Might want to deposit that before you lose it in a coat you never wash. Might, Wyatt said. He didn't move toward the bank yet. He stood by the truck a minute, looking back at the courthouse steps. Empty now. No reporters left camped out since the story had gone quiet after the county vote got tabled. Earl, Wyatt said, you didn't have to walk that fence line with me. Didn't have to stand up at that meeting either. No, Earl agreed. Didn't have to do the section work with Hollis back in '74 either. Did it anyway. I want to pay you. Not a thank you. Real money. Earl's jaw tightened, the way it did when a man didn't want charity mistaken for friendship. Don't need your money, Wyatt. $15,000, Wyatt said. Consulting fee. For the survey work, the deed reading, testifying at the board. That's a real job, Earl. You did real work. Earl looked at him a long moment. You'd have paid a lawyer that much just to read a page out loud. Deborah's getting paid plenty. This is yours. Earl scratched at his jaw. Fine, he said. But I'm putting half of it toward a new transit level. Mine's older than you are. He almost smiled. And the other half's going in the bank, not toward whatever fool errand you dream up next. Deal. They shook on it standing in the truck's shadow, the way men in Nelson County had closed deals for 100 years. No paper needed for that part. The bank teller on Bellamy Street didn't blink when Wyatt slid the check across, though her eyebrows went up a fraction reading the number. This clears in 3 business days, she said. You want to open a separate account for it or run it through your existing one? Separate, Wyatt said. The old one's got maybe $11 in it. She didn't laugh, but her mouth twitched like she wanted to. He walked out of the bank into October light, the ridge behind town gone golden rust with the leaves turning early that year. He didn't feel richer walking down Bellamy Street. He felt like a man who'd finally stopped holding his breath. Renata called him that evening, the first time she'd called since the will reading. Wyatt almost let it ring out before he picked up. I heard about the closing, she said. Whole town's heard. Figured they would. I'm not calling to ask for anything, she said. Quick, like she needed to get that part out before he hung up. Dale wanted me to say the auto shop's behind on its note. Bank's talking about calling it in. That's not mine to fix, Renata. I know. A pause. I told him not to call you. Told him some debts a man's got to sit in. You told him that. I did. Her voice had something tired in it, something that sounded less like scheming and more like a woman worn down by a husband's bad math. I'm sorry about the tractor, Wyatt. Sorry about a lot of it. I know sorry doesn't buy back a tractor. No, Wyatt said. It doesn't. He let a breath out. But I heard you say it. That was as far as he let that conversation go. He didn't offer money. He didn't close any door either. Some things, Deborah had told him once, you let sit exactly where they land. The following Saturday, Wyatt drove out to Tuck's grafting supply over in Lovingston, the same place Hollis used to order rootstock from every February for 30 years. He walked in with a list Earl had helped him write, careful printing on a legal pad. Need 40 dwarfing rootstocks, Wyatt told the man behind the counter. Grafting knives, budding tape, the works. And whatever you'd recommend to replace a hand pruner that's about done. The man behind the counter, gray-bearded, looked at the list, then at Wyatt. You're Hollis Colson's boy, grandson. Heard about the road money. He didn't say it unkind. You putting it into rootstock instead of a new truck, that's not the first thing I'd have guessed. Orchard's not dead, Wyatt said, just old and hurting. Same as him, near the end. The man rang up the total, $2,200 even. Wyatt paid it without blinking, the number small enough now that it barely registered against everything else that had moved through his hands that month. He drove the rootstock home in the truck bed, wrapped in wet burlap the way the man had shown him, and unloaded it into the shed that evening while Earl held a flashlight steady against the growing dark. 40 trees, Earl said. Same count as what's dying out there. Not replacing them, Wyatt said, planting alongside. Let the new ones grow up next to what's left, however long that takes. 10 years before you see real fruit off dwarf stock like that. I've got time, Wyatt said. I'm 21, Earl. Grandpa waited 60 years on a road. I can wait 10 on an apple. Earl didn't answer right away. He just held the light steady, and something in his face looked like a man watching a thing he recognized settle into place exactly where it belonged. Spring came late that year, frost holding on past Easter, but the 40 new rootstocks took anyway. Earl said that was Hollis's luck rubbing off on the ground even after he was gone. Wyatt didn't argue with that. By April, the shed had electric heat installed, a wood stove Earl helped him haul in from a farm auction over in Afton, $22 at the gavel. Wyatt still slept there most nights, though the farmhouse sat empty now, bank-owned, Dale and Renata gone to a rental in Lovingston after the auto shop note finally got called. Wyatt heard about that from the feed store counter, not from Dale himself. He didn't go looking for the details. Some things you let the county paper carry instead of your own chest. He kept walking the rows every morning. Habit outlived reason a long time ago, and he'd stopped needing a reason. One Saturday in May, Earl showed up with a piece of poplar board under his arm, sanded smooth, and a can of black paint sitting on the truck seat. Figured the place needed a name on it, Earl said. Been Colson land 90 years? Never had a sign. Wyatt looked at the board. You planning on painting it yourself? Steadier hand than yours, Earl said. You still can't cut a straight line with a level in your hands. Seen you try. They set the board across two sawhorses in the shade of the shed, and Earl mixed the paint slow, testing it on a scrap first. Wyatt held the stencil while Earl's brush moved letter by letter, unhurried, like a man who'd waited 74 years to get this particular sentence right. Colson Orchard, it read when he was done. E.S.T. Hollis Colson. Not established, Wyatt said, reading it over. Just his name. Didn't need a date, Earl said. Man planted a road nobody could see for 60 years. Didn't need a date stamped on that either. They hung it over the shed door that afternoon, 2 lag bolts and a level Wyatt held steady while Earl checked it twice. It caught the 5 o'clock light coming down off the ridge, black letters sharp against new white paint. Wyatt stood back and looked at it a long while. Looks right, he said. Looks late, Earl said, but right's better than early most days. That evening Wyatt drove into Tanner's Gap for the mail he'd been putting off collecting, a week's worth stacked at the post office box. Bills, seed catalogs, a letter from Deborah's office about the reassessment on the remaining 30 acres, valued now at close to $90,000 once the corridor stigma came off the county rolls. At the bottom of the stack sat a manila envelope with no return address, his name written across the front in handwriting he didn't recognize. Inside was a single page, a photocopy of a receipt, 20 years old, water-stained at one corner. Grafting supplies, Tucks in Lovingston, paid in full, signed Hollis Colson. Underneath it, in newer ink, somebody had written 11 words. He never once thought about selling it either. Same as you, no signature. Wyatt turned the envelope over twice, looking for one, and found nothing. He asked at Tuck's the following week, showed the gray-bearded man behind the counter the photocopy. The man studied it a long moment, then shook his head slow. Not mine, he said. But I'll tell you this. Half the old growers in this county remember Hollis turning down state money for that strip more than once, long before any of you knew a road was coming. Somebody wanted you to know you weren't the only one who noticed. Wyatt folded the page and put it in his jacket, next to nothing else, just to have it there. He never did find out who sent it. Some doors in a small county stayed shut on purpose, and he'd learned by then not to knock on everyone. The reassessment letter turned into a check by July, $91,000 for the standing value on the untouched 30 acres, on top of the corridor money already settled. Wyatt used $18,000 of it, clearing back taxes and county liens that had piled up quiet since Hollis's last illness, debts nobody had told him about until the county treasurer's office started calling. That's the last of it, the clerk told him over the phone, the day the final lien cleared. Colson parcel's clean. First time since 1994, matter of fact. 1994, Wyatt repeated. Your grandfather let a fence dispute go to lien back then. Neighbors' cows got into his rows. Settled eventually, but it sat on the books 30 years nobody bothered to clear. She paused. Man kept fighting quiet battles a long time before this one, looks like. Wyatt hung up the phone, standing in the shed doorway, under the new sign, and thought about that. A man who'd spent 60 years defending 40 acres nobody wanted, one lien and one deed at a time, never raising his voice about any of it. Deborah's office called again in August, this time about Dale. Not a lawsuit, she said. A message. He asked me to pass it to you instead of calling himself. Said he figured you'd rather hear it that way. What's the message? He's paying back what he can on the tractor. $200 a month starting this fall, once the shop's steady again. She let that sit, said it wasn't the full value, said it was what he could actually do. Wyatt didn't answer right away. You don't have to take it, Deborah said. I can tell him no. Take it, Wyatt said. $200 a month's a start. That's not everything fixed. No, Wyatt said, but it's something moving instead of sitting. He didn't call Dale to say thank you. He let Deborah carry the yes back the same way she'd carried the ask, and that was the shape the two of them settled into after that. A debt paid slow through a lawyer's office instead of a kitchen table, which was more conversation than the two of them had managed face to face in years. By September, the new rootstock had leafed out thick along the fence line, 40 young trees standing in a row that didn't yet look like much, knee-high, staked against the wind. Wyatt walked them every morning, same as he walked the old dying trees. Two different generations of the same ground. He still hand-watered the two grafted trees at the end of row 9. Hadn't missed a morning since February, cold or not. One Sunday, Earl found him out there with the bucket, sun barely up, mist still sitting low over Sutton's Gap. "Those two trees are near 70 years old," Earl said. "Same age as me, near enough?" "Older," Wyatt said. "Grandpa grafted them the year before you two started section work together." Earl crouched down slow, knees complaining, and put a hand against the bark same as Wyatt had a dozen times that year. "He tell you why he grafted these two, out of the whole orchard?" "Never said." These were his father's rootstock. Last two trees off the original planting, back before the road was even a rumor. Earl straightened up. He kept these alive 60 years, so there'd always be something on this ground older than the argument over it. Wyatt looked down the row, toward the sign over the shed door, toward the 40 new trees standing thin and green along the fence. "Guess there's 3 generations out here now," he said. "4, counting you," Earl said. "You're not just tending it, Wyatt, you're the next one it's counting on." That evening, Wyatt carried the manila envelope with the anonymous photocopy inside up to the shed, along with the folded newspaper clipping from the county vote and the closing letter from Priscilla Nunn's office, 3 pieces of paper that had carried him from 21 and broke to something else entirely. He set them together on the shelf above the wood stove, the closest thing the shed had to a mantel, weighted down with a chunk of quartz Earl had pulled out of the fence line dirt years back and never thrown out. He stood there a minute in the low light, the new sign visible through the open door, Colson Orchard catching the last of the sun, same as it had in May. "Wasn't ever about the road," Wyatt said, quiet, the way he talked to the trees most mornings, half to himself and half to somebody who wasn't there to answer. "Was about you keeping your word long enough for somebody to find it." Outside, the 2 old trees stood at the end of row 9, bark rough under 60 years of weather, roots running deeper than any survey stake had ever measured. Down the fence line, the 40 young ones waited on their first real winter, thin and green and early, planted for a harvest a long way off yet. Wyatt banked the stove, latched the door, and walked out into the last of the light to check the water line one more time before dark, same as every evening since the day he'd knelt in that shed dirt and found out exactly what his grandfather had been waiting on. The following Tuesday, Deborah drove out to the shed instead of calling. She had somebody with her. "Wyatt, this is Ruth Pruitt," she said. "Lives off Route 6, other side of Sutton's Gap." Ruth was maybe 80, small, gripping a folder against her chest like it might blow away. "Heard what you did at that hearing," she said. "Heard it twice, actually. Once from my nephew, once from the clerk's office." "Wasn't just me," Wyatt said. "Earl did most of the reading." "Well," Ruth held out the folder. "My grandfather signed something back in 58. Never made much of it. County's got a new stretch of the bypass coming through my side next year." Deborah took the folder, flipped through it fast, her eyebrows lifting the way they did when a page said more than a client expected. "There's a reservation clause in here too," she said. "Almost identical language to your grandfather's." "The clerk almost missed it," Ruth said. "Told me herself. Said after your case they started checking deed books twice before any condemnation notice goes out. Said nobody wanted a second Colson situation." Wyatt didn't say anything for a second. He looked at the folder in Deborah's hands, thin and yellowed. Somebody else's 60-year wait sitting right there in plain paper. "That's not luck," Earl said, coming around the shed with a bucket in each hand. "That's the county changing how it does business because of what got read into the record on Bellamy Street." Ruth looked between the two of them. "I didn't come for a speech," she said. "I came to say thank you and to ask if your lawyer takes new clients." "She does," Wyatt said. "Deborah's better than anybody Dale could have hired." Deborah almost smiled at that. "I'll draw up the retainer this week," she told Ruth. "Same rate as before, flat, capped, fair enough." Ruth folded her hands over the folder again, quieter now. "Your grandfather," she said to Wyatt. "Did you know him well?" 2 years, mostly in a truck, Wyatt said. Driving him to Charlottesville and back. That's better than most grandsons get, Ruth said. Better than most sons, from what I hear around town. She didn't wait for an answer to that. She let Deborah walk her back to the car, and the two of them pulled out down the driveway past the new sign, past the 40 young trees still thin along the fence, and Wyatt stood there a minute longer than he needed to, watching the dust settle behind Deborah's tires. Earl set the buckets down by the shed door. County didn't fix that on its own, he said. Somebody had to force it to look twice. Wasn't trying to force anything, Wyatt said. Was just trying to keep 40 acres. Didn't say you meant to. Earl picked the buckets back up. Said you did it anyway. They walked the rows together that evening, same route Wyatt had walked alone all spring, past the dying trees leaning gray and stubborn against the fence line, past the 40 new ones staked and green, out toward the 2 old graft trees at the end of row 9. Earl filled one bucket at the spigot by the shed and handed it over without being asked. "You'll be out here doing this at 70, Earl said. "Same as your grandfather was. Worse things to be doing at 70. No argument there." Earl looked down the row toward the ridge, gold light sitting low over Tanner's Gap, smoke starting to curl from a chimney somewhere past the tree line. He used to stand right here most evenings. Didn't say much, just looked at the ridge a while, then went in. "He tell you why?" "Never asked," Earl said. "Some men you let keep their own reasons." Wyatt knelt at the base of the first old tree and poured the water slow, same as every morning since February, watching it soak into ground that had taken 60 years of the same hands doing the same thing. The bark was rough under his palm, deep grooved, older than the argument that had almost buried it. "Grandpa ever tell you he was scared?" Wyatt asked. "That the state would just take it anyway? File something, push it through, not wait on him to say yes?" Earl thought about that a long moment. "Once," he said. "Only once, and only because I asked him straight out one afternoon, same spot we're standing. He said scared didn't matter. Said a man just had to keep saying no long enough for the right person to come along and say it louder. That's what I did at that hearing." "Said it louder." "No," Earl said. "Deborah said it louder. You just showed up and didn't sell." Wyatt didn't argue with that. He moved to the second tree, poured the last of the water, and stood up, knees damp with dirt the way they were most evenings now. "I keep thinking about Ruth Pruitt's folder," he said. "How close that clause came to getting buried same as his did." "Wasn't close," Earl said. "Not this time. That's the difference." The light kept dropping behind the ridge, orange going to rust, going to the gray that meant supper time in every house along Route 6. Somewhere down toward Bellamy Street, a car horn sounded twice, faint, somebody hollering across a parking lot, ordinary town noise carrying up the switchback the way it always had. Earl picked up the empty buckets. "I'll head on," he said. "Wife's got supper waiting, and she don't wait long. Thanks for coming out." "Didn't come out for you," Earl said, "but there wasn't any bite in it. Came out because Ruth needed somebody who'd already sat through it once." He walked off toward his truck, and Wyatt stood alone at the end of row 9 a while longer, the way he had most evenings that year, hands still resting flat against the bark of the second old tree. Down past the fence, the new sign over the shed door had gone dark with the sun behind it, letters only a shade darker than the wood now, Colson Orchard holding its shape in the last of the light. He latched the shed for the night. Same routine, same door, same lock Earl had helped him fix back in March. Frost wasn't due for months yet, but he checked the water line anyway, out of habit more than need. The 2 old trees stood black against the ridge, bark rough, roots deep. Down the fence, the young ones waited on winter, thin and patient in the dark.